Welcome one and all to a very special episode of TALKO Tuesday. We haven't done one of these in a while. I am greeted by Kim,
Hello.
and they got me started on a show called Our Flag Means Death.
I heard
And
it. I very much pestered you until you watched it for a year.
yes, I still have an all caps DM on Instagram.
It
uh,
says watch our flag means death if you want to.
this is the most aggressive way of politely suggesting a show, but um, it's I mean, I have to be honest. It's a really good show. I'm glad that you know, asked me to watch it because I did enjoy every minute of it. Um, and that's what we're going to talk about today. um,
Yeah.
and in from what you've shown me in your notes, excruciating detail. So, um,
I'm nothing if not thorough.
yeah. So before we jump into anything kind of spoiler heavy, I mean, we both obviously think the show is great, but just overall general impressions of the show. Um, I mean, I've kind of gotten yours. I'll give you mine because maybe you can tell me if there's something missing from this interpretation of the show.
Sure.
For me in particular, I mean, I love the show's got amazing production quality. It's got great acting, great writing. It's a comedy at the end of the day, and it's hilarious all the way through. With some very nice, heartfelt, and even some dark moments in it. That being said, like the thing that gripped me about the show so much, and this is like a credit to all the writers who worked on it, especially people like Taika Waititi, who's like kind of known for this in the industry. Just a really nice portrayal, finally, of some healthy masculinity on screen.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Um, Fully agree. I think the cast is incredible. The writing is incredible. Um, I think so for me, obviously I am like obsessed with the show. I have been succumbed to the pirate brain rot for over a year. Um, but the way I tell people about the show is it is a gay pirate rom-com. It is like, and I feel like those words just like spark something in people. They're like, yes, this is for me. Or it's
Mhm.
not, and that's great. Hi, Chris. Well, you were briefly, sorry. Um,
Chris
So
is.
I have been like spreading the gospel of this show to anybody that will hear me. And frankly, not a lot of people have like followed through and actually watching it, so thank you for that.
Mhm.
Um, but it is a comedic historical fiction, and it reminded me a lot of A Knight's Tale in the way that it's told. I feel like the showrunner for this show, David Jenkins, kind of saw like the Wikipedia article about Blackbeard and Steve Bonnet and how there was like speculation about their relationship and went, I can make a show about that. And I think it came out incredible.
Yes. No, that seems pretty accurate because I know a little bit of pirate history. Thank you, Assassin's Creed, for
Mm.
drilling that into my head. As
Thank you.
fictional,
My whole life spent at Ren fairs.
yeah. As fictional as a lot of that history can be because it's all legends and a lot of it has descended in the myth over time. I mean, we're talking like 16th century history for the most part. Um, you know, I mean, at the very least, one of the more hilarious things about the show is there are like two characters who can read and write um,
Yeah.
that we
Well,
see
so
frequently.
I mean, we can talk about this later if you want to, but there's like speculation about whether Blackbeard can.
Hmm.
Izzy for sure can, Lucius and Steed can. But I think the thing with Blackbeard like signing the X is like more like the persona than anything
Yeah.
because he's like described throughout the show as history's greatest tactician
Hmm.
and just the way that he like thinks and like moves about his life, I think that it's easy to be like, oh, he can't read, but
Yeah.
you know.
No, I mean, even so, it's interesting to see them bring up concepts like that and kind of stick to them
Right.
because it presents a unique challenge in a show if you tell, a director as a writer or producer of a show, hey, most of our cast can't read and write, they have a whole new challenge to deal with.
Right.
It's like it brings me to things like watching A Quiet Place, where you're saying like, okay, one of our characters is completely deaf. How do you build anything around that?
Yeah. And I think that's
Especially,
something that the show handles really well is different abilities and different I mean just, let's just jump right into it. Different bodies and different skin tones and different like gender expressions. And that it's never once like called out.
mm,
Um like for example, Black Pete has like the cleft lip surgery scar and a
mm,
lisp, and like no one ever says like comments on how he talks.
yeah,
um no one ever um so when we could, I don't know if it's weird to just like talk about these things, but like Jim coming
mm,
out as, I'm just Jim. I like was formerly using he him pronouns and hiding.
mm,
Now it's just they them. I'm not a fucking mermaid. That's the extent of it. Like there's not um and the actor Vico Ortiz even said like I didn't have to educate anybody. It wasn't a whole story arc about being non-binary. It was just like I'm Jim and then
mm.
everyone's on board and puns. Uh and then like that's just how it was, and I feel like approaching these issues in such a like neutral way is incredible representation. It's not like, oh, we're so special, look how cool we are showing a non-binary person. Like another HBO show, Sex Lives of College Girls. I couldn't think of the name, so I had to look at Chris. Vico Ortiz is in that as well, but there's very much like a I am non-binary, this is what that means, like whole monologue about it.
Yeah.
So it's really refreshing to just see these sorts of things just normalized.
Oh
It's just
yes.
who they are.
Well, that's I'll say that, and then I mean, I agree with that, and we'll jump into spoiler territory after this. I mean, knowing that Vico Ortiz is, non-binary and gender fluid and stuff like that outside of the show is a great step for representation, but the way it's handled in the show, like you said, is really, really good also,
Yeah.
because that isn't just the one dimension to the character anymore. It
Right.
is very much part of who they are, but it doesn't define who they are. And that's important for representation in a way that's a whole lot more educational than
Mhm.
sitting down and reading out like the DSM-5 on what it means to be non-binary.
Yeah.
um, and I love that so much about the show because there is so much, like you said, just representation in this show across the board for genders, you know, different ethnicities, different cultures of people, all kinds of things are kind of blended in this show in a way where
Yeah.
it's not let's info dump on you for 20 minutes about who these people are. Let's
Yeah.
just show you that these people are capable of being anybody despite who they may be outwardly.
Right. And I think another huge thing in it too is that like there are so many different body types represented and every single one of them gets to have love.
Yeah. I,
And I mean, it's never in question and it's wonderful.
hmm And I think that's also pretty important. I mean, I can talk about just the height difference between like the major love interest in the show, and I did not know Taika Waititi was that tall. Is all I have to say. um,
Yeah. Well, him and Reese Darby are fairly close in height, but like
mhm,
I mean there's Christian Nairn who's Hodor from Game of
yeah.
Thrones is like a massive person, and in general he's so tall,
hmm
and it's just like, oh yeah, that's Wee John.
Yeah. it's
Like obviously there's the joke about like Wee John, but that's like the
hmm
extent of it. Like it's just he's cool, he carries a shillelagh, like all right, let's go.
Oh yes. I
So I
mean,
mean, and it also covers like in a pretty subtle way, I would think, like mental health issues,
hmm
and how they affect people's relationships and stuff like that. So
oh
that's
yeah.
huge.
Well, it is huge because I mean, for I'll just say this for people like us, people who are neurodivergent somewhere along that spectrum. Uh, we I could go back to like the terrible, terrible Sia film. Um, there have not been great portrayals of us in media.
Yeah.
Anytime someone talks about autism in Hollywood, it is let's just do it to the utmost extreme. Our
Yeah.
character is going to be like nonverbal and stimming all the time and like
Hmm.
completely uncontrollable without neurotypical people right alongside them.
Yeah.
And I don't think I had to correct a therapist on this once, but I think the only other direction they try to swing is what they like to call functional autistics, which is the problem with understanding spectrums is people still want to move towards either extreme.
Right.
um, what this show does is it shows people along in really throughout, I should say, the spectrum because the spectrum isn't necessarily a line.
Yeah. And
um,
I think the thing with Steed especially, Reese
mhm,
Darby has even said that this character is so special to him because of how like who he is as a person.
mhm,
And obviously we're talking about the fictionalized Steve Bonnet, not the
yeah.
real one. The We don't need to get into that. Um, but like for his whole life, he was ostracized for being, not the typical masculine person,
Mhm,
for liking certain things, for not liking certain things, and for just kind of being who he is. And for him to be able to kind of leave that life behind and find a family,
mhm.
and like everyone just, I mean, not at first, obviously. Um, they wanted to mutiny on him, but like, but eventually they come around, and he is just accepted for who he is, and he
Mhm,
finds, spoilers, he finds love. He doesn't realize it at the time because he's never actually felt that way,
mhm.
but he comes around and realizes it, and we'll see if it's too late.
Well, that's. I'm glad you said that he finds a family because that's something that I've talked about in anime a lot. A lot of like my favorite anime shows are found family shows.
Hmm.
As much shit as like shows like Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid kind of rightfully get for the portrayals of some of their characters, at its heart, it is a found family show.
I mean, he
Um,
even says, "My family's here now," like in
yeah,
referring to the people on his ship.
exactly. And it's heartwarming to see those things because a lot of that's missing in a lot of old media, especially. And I think we need more portrayals of that where it's like, hey, yes, you have your flesh and blood relatives, but those aren't always going to be the best people to sort of stick beside all the
Yeah.
time because some of those people can be genuinely terrible. Versus, here's a group of people that I can relate to and that sometimes get on my nerves and sometimes literally want to mute me off my own ship, but but
In the first episode.
yes, but I'm able to, come to terms with them and build healthy relationships with them and understand them and have them understand me.
Yeah.
All right, well, I think we will just move straight on into spoiler territories right now because we're digging there already.
We've been there. We've been there. Um, so, just to piggyback on what we were just talking about, I think the other side of that coin is like the ADHD thing with Ed,
Hmm.
and how he's, again, history's most notorious pirate, the greatest tactician. But he feels trapped in this life, and he wants to be seen for who he is and not this persona that he performs. Um, and let's go full spoilery on it. He finds somebody that does that, and meanwhile, everyone else is telling him that it's wrong, and he's just like, "But I want to be Ed. I don't want to be Blackbeard."
Yeah, and I think that is one of the central themes of the show, and that's why I say it's such a great portrayal of healthy masculinity. Is you have
Yeah,
someone who has been forced to
but
put on the.
they're telling him like, you're wrong, you're
Hmm.
not in your right mind, like, and he is, doing some eccentric things, but like everyone, Izzy is telling him that he's
Yeah.
wrong for, acting this way, but it's like he's
Hmm.
just truly finding who he wants to be.
Yeah. Well, Izzy is that foil. Izzy is, and this is, I'll bring up like a modern analogy for this. Izzy is the Andrew Tate simp.
Oh
um,
God, you're not
Izzy,
wrong, but oh God.
yeah. Izzy is the guy who like watches like a Manosphere podcaster and can't let go of that because that is kind of like the father figure in their entire world at this point. That is the
Mhm.
person who's supposed to teach them how to be a man. And Izzy rather tragically, even though he's a despicable fucking person, ties a lot of his self worth to this image he upholds of who Blackbeard is supposed to be. And when
Yeah.
that image starts to crumble and starts to break away, Izzy just fucking loses it.
Hmm.
um, he
Yeah,
is.
he's not willing to give that up, even if it's not his to have any control over.
Oh, yes. And he will. I mean, he is at a certain point in the show, he is just scorched earth policy. Like he will do anything to get his Blackbeard back.
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, it leads to great moments in the show, but like I think that's also a credit to the writers. They make you just fucking hate Izzy, like to his
Hmm.
core.
Do you
um,
think he has a redemption arc in season two?
uh, I would hope so, but
This is just speculation. This isn't spoilers yet.
yes, I
We'll talk
mean
about season two spoilers later.
that's the thing is one part of me hopes so because he is an interesting character and his actor's honestly brilliant,
Hmm.
but also I don't hope because I love him as a villain. I love him as
Yeah,
this constant foil.
I think he's a great villain, but I think in seeing Ed heal, it would be
Hmm.
really nice to see Izzy come to that realization that it was damaging
Hmm.
for Ed as a person.
Yeah.
Or like it's either gonna go like that or it's gonna go completely like get rid of Izzy. Like there's no
Hmm.
room for him here anymore.
Yeah. I mean, I think with the ending that we did get to season one, there is there is still obviously tension between Blackbeard and Izzy. And I mean, even tension has now brewed into just straight up animosity. You can
Right.
tell that Blackbeard, like deep down, hates this man.
Yeah,
uh,
and he hates himself. I mean, he
yes.
puts on the Blackbeard persona again, and then like the very last shot of him is him breaking down and crying because I
Hmm.
mean, one can assume it doesn't outright say it, but like he doesn't want this.
Yeah.
He's doing it to protect himself, but he doesn't want it.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that is it's interesting to see a comedy end in what is really a tragedy is
Yeah.
to see one of our main well both of our main characters kind of lose it all at the end of season one.
But like vastly different ways.
Yeah.
So Steed, you know, hits his lowest point, but then goes back to his life and gives it all up.
Hmm.
Um, while Blackbeard just kind of loses it and does what he can to protect himself.
Yes. Well, as a loose synopsis of the show, and we'll get into more details because I know you again have many many notes on this. A loose synopsis for those who don't know while we're still talking about this is essentially this guy Steve Bonnet, who
15
is
minutes into the show, I'm sorry.
yeah, is this kind of he's born into a family where he's kind of just set up for life. He's gonna inherit
He's
it
a wealthy
all.
landowner in the 18th century, and
Yeah,
that just means that he's got all kinds of money.
yeah. He's got an obscene amount of wealth basically, and he's kind of expected to be not only a quote unquote man's man, but to continue this legacy that he's been passed down of essentially British aristocracy. um, and he gets fed up with that after many things happen in his life and decides, you know what, I'm going to be a pirate now. And so he blows a substantial amount of his fortune on buying a ship and assembling a crew to just set off for what he thinks is adventure. He has weaned himself and even his children on pirate legends and myths and thinks like this is going to be awesome and cool. And reality eventually kicks in, and he's not having such a great time, which is putting it very lightly.
Right.
Um, but reality starts to kick in, and through this sort of crazy pirate adventure and him trying to put on airs as like a pirate, is where he has encounters with all these characters and learns a lot, not just about them, but about himself, and realizes that he may be entirely in and over his head, but that doesn't mean he doesn't have things of value to bring to other people.
Hmm.
And that's kind of where we sort of get the middle of the show where Blackbeard comes in, and we realize there's more depth to his character, there's more depth to Steve's character, and their relationship kind of starts off transactional, where they're just trading information about one another's lives to each other, but also realizing that the grass is not greener on either side of this fence.
Hmm.
um, it is pretty shitty on both sides. As much as a pirate can physically slit your throat, an aristocrat can mentally and emotionally do that to you.
Hmm.
Um, and seeing these two men really grow together and eventually, the big spoiler if you haven't watched it, fall in love with one another, is just an amazing thing to see. That's kind of the show in a nutshell, but there's a whole lot of detail that I threw out there.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a very apt but very succinct way of summarizing it.
Yes. So if we go back to the details, if we're going like all the way back episode 1, right? Um I mean, I'll be honest with you. I remember very little from episode 1 because I was so engrossed in everything wrapping up at the end of season 1.
Hmm.
Um but the things that I remember, the important stuff I remember from there, and again, feel free to chime in if I'm missing more important things here, is so we get that kind of initial story of Steed, sort of setting sail on the ship, right?
So,
Mhm.
before we jump into that real
Mhm.
fast, I think a huge thing that it shows is his disconnect with his family, with his wife, um, even with his children in a way. Like he only really connects with them over being or playing pirates.
Mhm.
Um, it shows him and his wife exchanging gifts to each other on their anniversary, and she paints him the lighthouse that was at their wedding, and it's we're supposed to be lighthouses for each other, and he maybe this is not episode 1, maybe I'm just getting things confused, but I think it is still important that like
Mhm.
he leaves this family behind because he doesn't fit.
Yeah.
It's not just that he doesn't want it anymore, he doesn't fit. He never did, and he
Mhm.
seeks adventure because he wants to find a place where he does.
Oh yeah. No, and this can draw a parallel to a lot of people. I mean, it draws a parallel to my life.
Hmm.
When I left for basic training, that was very much because I felt like I was not doing enough with my life to begin with. And so I leave and sort of settle on this difficult trial and realize that I also didn't fit there. And there's a parallel to that in the show.
Hmm.
Um, and so, yeah, Steed does have, I mean, again, we have this sort of running theme of two people who are kind of stuck together in the show where they really don't want to be, and that is Steed and his wife.
Yeah. And I think even so, to jump ahead a little bit,
Mhm.
and it ties back in, I'll get there. But the last episode title is Wherever You Go, There You Are.
Yeah.
And I think that that's just an overall theme of the show. Like he leaves his life, he doesn't fit there, but his problems come with him, and he
Mhm.
needs to fix himself. Like this doesn't isn't like an easy fix for him. And just like you said, it follows you, and you got to work on yourself as a person, and
Mhm.
not just like finding adventure isn't gonna make you better.
Oh yeah. Well, I
But
mean, Claudia is his wife's name, and
well, Claudia's the actress.
Claudia is you're right. Mary is her
Yeah,
name.
Mary. Yeah, Claudia O'Doherty. Love her.
Yes. So, I mean, she's the little bit of screen time that she gets. First of all, I mean, is brilliant. She executes perfectly.
Hmm.
um, but I like the episode that we get her in, and because one, it's a brilliant tale of how to do a breakup. um,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, how to do a mutually beneficial breakup, I should say. Where people eventually come to terms with the fact that maybe our relationship wasn't the best thing in the world. No matter how much we force it, it isn't going to work out. It's not even healthy for our children anymore.
Hmm.
um, and we need to try something else.
Right.
And I mean, it's a hilarious episode. On top of that, I mean, Steed just fucking sells it. um, but
Something else that he says in episode one, I think it's episode one, is if I can
mhm.
help this crew grow as people, then I've succeeded at being a pirate captain.
Yeah.
As his crew is planning a mutiny.
Well, yes, and
But
that's
I think he does that. I think every single person is affected by his people positive management style and
mhm.
just being around him. And, I think he achieves that by the end. He has the respect of his crew.
Oh yes.
And he's got stuff that he still needs to work on himself, but I think he's achieved that.
Yeah. Well, he absolutely does get the respect of his crew. Because you have to think going from the point of we want to mutiny you to the point where like we're ready to turn you into fish chum. To okay, you are the tie that binds this entire group together. Is a massive transition, but it's nice that it takes us, 10 episodes to get to that point.
Yeah.
Um, versus, that flipping in one episode or something ridiculous like that. Um, I have to go to Black Pete's character because we even get introduced to sort of his entire personality, and this is kind of a
Hmm.
brilliant way of doing a character one dimensionally until a certain point in the show, where Black Pete himself is this sort of weird embodiment of true toxic masculinity, where he will just straight up lie to people. He was a member of Blackbeard's crew. He was Blackbeard's right hand man. He did all these crazy things in Blackbeard's name, and everyone is kind of looking at him with this side eye that you don't really see, but you can feel. Where a lot of people at a certain point in the show are like, "Look, dude, we're tired of the bullshit. Can you please just shut up for like 5 seconds?"
Yeah. No
uh,
one, no one actually believes you, right?
yeah, and I mean, it's hilarious to hear him come up with these tales because they do get more grandiose as the show goes on. Where you
Hmm.
think this guy at any moment could talk about like how he slayed dragons with Blackbeard or something.
Yeah.
um, and it's hilarious to see all that. But even if we rewind back to earlier episodes, we get Rory Kinnear's characters coming in as the brothers badminton, as I like to call them. um, and these are Steed's bullies, basically, in the show. Uh,
Literally in the show.
yes, and not just in the time that the show takes place in, but also through flashbacks, we learn that these people were kind of tormentors throughout Steve's entire childhood and even his adult life later on. But they are the typical, I guess, quote unquote, Chad character. They've accomplished a lot in their lives. They are admirals for the Royal British Navy. Um, they are tasked with hunting down pirates pretty much exclusively at this point, and they pride themselves on their job and their ability to do it well, but the way that they find security in themselves is by pushing down other men.
Yeah.
um, and that's actually what ironically makes them very good at their jobs.
Hmm.
And it is through a stroke of both luck and irony and hilarity that Steed gets the jump on the first brother and ends him in pretty shocking and brutal fashion.
Hmm.
um,
Yeah, he asks for
yeah.
assistance for a stun move. He's not really the killing type. And, stuns Nigel, and Nigel falls on his own sword.
Yes. And I'll just put it out here in complete detail. When we say fall on his own sword, I'm not talking about like he ran himself through the abdomen.
Mm-mm.
I'm talking like this is a one in a billion shot of stabbing someone with a cavalry saber clean through their skull by going through the eye. And I'm sorry, you can be the most. I know people who are actual like HEMA fencers and duelists. This is like an impossible thing to do. So, um,
They even say that because the couple of people that Steed confides in that like this was an accident. They're like, no, 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 you did this on purpose. And so he comes back and says, I did this on purpose. And they're like, do you know how hard it is to stab someone through the skull?
Yeah. um, but it is. I mean, it's that extra bit that adds to sort of the charm of this show is seeing things like that happen.
And I think it's so funny too because the first shot you see of Nigel,
Hmm.
he he goes I to put his spyglass into his eye, and someone else holds something over his eye, and I feel like that kind of like foreshadowing on that is just amazing.
Oh
Like those
yes.
little details are, everything.
Let's see. I mean, you gotta love the detailed foreshadowing of that nature.
Hmm.
But
And Chauncey has a birthmark over his.
yes. um, and it's. I think those parallels. I think the parallel actually between Nigel and Chauncey is great as well because we get our introduction to Nigel first, who looks very put together. You know, he's sort of this bright, sort of this young, bright-eyed soldier, basically, who, he
Very
reminds.
entitled, but yes.
Yes, he's very entitled, but he reminds me of the kinds of people who go from like West Point straight to officer school in real life, and they will never put their boots on the ground, so to speak. Um, versus Chauncey, who is like he's weathered, he's beaten. He still takes pride in his job and does what he needs to do, but you can see he is not enjoying it. Um, this is very much a sort of matter of fact thing. You can tell that he was kind of forced to live this life, and he's sick of it by this time and just kind of wants to get the job done. Um, but
Well, yeah, Chauncey's I think just a captain, and
mhm,
Nigel's a captain. Chauncey is an admiral,
yeah,
so he's a higher rank than his
hmm,
brother. But he's also like out for revenge,
yeah,
um, because of his brother's death. Like, so
hmm,
he's like harrowed by this thing that happened, and like that
hmm,
really shows. And it really shows in his appearance, but also in the way he acts and the way that other people interact with him. Like, even his own inferior like soldiers around him are
hmm,
like, no, you're going too far with this.
yeah. Well, it's. I'll just bring this up as an aside here because I have to. Every time I see Rory Kinnear's face, it just reminds me of this. I didn't recognize him until I went back recently and watched Black Mirror again,
Yep.
and realized he was in the first episode of
First
Black
episode, yeah.
Mirror. um,
Yeah.
I won't. I mean, people have seen Black Mirror. I'm still not going to spoil anything about it. If you haven't watched this episode of Black Mirror, just go watch it because it
Or
is.
don't. Or don't.
It
It's really
depends.
gross.
It depends on what your stomach can take.
It's the whole thing.
Yes,
Yeah,
but
yeah. Rory Kinnear is he's also in a movie where he plays like every character at some point, I think. I
mhm,
haven't actually watched it. I think it was like an A24 movie.
yeah.
But it is, yeah, his face is like visceral reaction to me now. I want to hate it. I want to punch it.
Well, we get to see more of his face even after his death in Our Flag Means Death because he is turned into this kind of phantom that begins to haunt Steed.
Mhm.
Um, and we get this sort of parallel between is he really there or is he a voice in Steed's head the entire time? Um, and we know that he's a voice in Steed's head by the end of this, but it is something that Steed has a lot of trouble blocking. I think this is like 4 episodes this runs for, where he's
I think it's like the
mhm,
first two or three
two or
because he
three.
gets rid of
Okay,
him after the ship runs aground and
gotcha.
they get it, which I think is the second episode or
Hmm.
third episode. I'm not
Well,
sure.
this is my problem with managing time. These episodes are long, I won't lie, and
They're like
so
30, 35 minutes, I think.
yes,
But
so
there are only 10 of them. It's like a
mhm.
5 hour watch,
Oh yes. Well, I will
which
say
I've done
this.
6.5 times.
Yeah, I will say the show is at least for its runtime, which is it will remain a mystery to me no matter how many times someone tells me that an episode is 35 minutes. It's about density for me.
Yeah, yeah.
And so this show packs a lot into its
A
runtime.
lot happens.
That said, it does it well and the pacing is brilliant throughout. But I mean, if you were telling me that an episode was honestly 35 minutes long, I'd be like, no, it wasn't. It was like an hour at least. It has to be.
Yeah, it feels like it. It really does. Even on what was my sixth watch through this past weekend,
Hmm.
really does feel like those episodes are super long.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even so, again, this phantom kind of haunts Steed throughout, and this is where we kind of get the flashbacks of him being bullied by these badminton brothers again. But also Steed learning to come to terms with the fact that no matter how he tries to rationalize this in his head, he is now responsible for someone's death,
Hmm.
and he has to live with that. He cannot just. I think the theme here is that he is so busy trying to make excuses for it, and that is why he is haunted by it. He is constantly trying to say like, "No, I didn't do this," or "This was an accident," or "Someone else contributed to this," when it's no, dude, you struck the killing blow. um,
I mean, technically, yeah, but
yes,
he gets over it.
he does
It's
get over it.
the shaman in the tribe helps him, come to terms with things, and
Mhm.
he ultimately moves on.
Oh god, the tribe was probably one of the best early parts of the show as well, because it's like you expect what you expect is subverted rather quickly, um, and it leads to a lot of funny moments. But again, it's a credit to the show's idea of doing real representation of people, showing like, yeah, these people have a way of living that you think is somehow primitive and somehow traditionalist and so on and so forth, but they speak English and they understand the modern world and they just don't want to be a part of it.
And they invented pina coladas.
Yes. um, which I love things like that. One of the characters we haven't touched on much though, and I think we will later because of the tie-in together, but we did talk about Jim, but Jim's love interest, Alawande, um, who plays a rather significant role
Hmm.
in this show. Um, Besides Nathan Foe's character, Lucius,
Hmm.
I think Alawande is the other person that Steve confides in kind of the most, at least in the beginning of the show. um,
Sure.
Alawande seems to be the one person on this ship whose, I guess I can say, quote unquote, sanity is intact.
Yeah, he's the
um,
voice of reason.
he, even though he kind of comes off as meek and mild, he doesn't really want to speak out. He's very much walking around the ship like, you guys are all idiots and you're going to get us all killed. um,
Yeah,
but the great thing is he does speak up and he does take action when it's important. And he kind of helps steer Steed at the beginning of the show in a direction towards, like, you put yourself in this situation. Here's how you have to handle it now. um,
absolutely. I think something he says is like, "We didn't choose this life. It's
mm-hmm,
the only option we had." Like,
yeah.
kind of hinting like, "Steve, you literally like
Mm-hmm.
bought yourself into this. Like,
Oh yeah.
why are you fretting about it?" But like, I think that's a huge thing that Steed kind of like subconsciously comes to terms with.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like he doesn't accept at first that like he's not a real pirate. He bought his way into it.
Oh
He
yeah.
doesn't need to be here, um, like everyone else does. But he kind of gets to a point where he relates more to his crew, and
Mm-hmm.
I think Olawande is a huge part of that.
Oh yes. Well, it's almost biblical in a sense because Steed is the character with the scales on his eyes, and Alawande is kind of the one who, in that moment, helps lift those scales from Steed's eyes. Where, I mean, I expected Alawande to just go off on him like, "You prissy, snobby little rich boy! How fucking dare you
Yeah.
think you know
No, but he
anything about
doesn't.
this?"
He doesn't. He's gentle about it, and then ultimately Steed kind of earns his keep, kind of
Yeah.
by the end of it. I would say.
Well, he does, and that's again that is because he is willing to eventually start listening to people like Alawande, and even seeing the value in some of our side characters like Frenchie and Roach, uh, Wee John, of course, and Buttons. Buttons is my favorite. I'm sorry.
Don't apologize. He's great.
um, I'm sorry. Once you go like full Scottish accent on me, as a character, you've kind of bought me at that point.
Mhm.
There's a character that I'm playing Jedi Survivor right now, and there's a character in there who, like, I mean, even if you're not into video games of this type, Scuba Stev is the most brilliant character in a Star Wars thing I've ever seen because he is this little Scottish snail fisherman, and the fact that they're working like just old Scottish sort of just mannerisms and the way they speak in general into Star Wars is fantastic, but that's an aside. Buttons is wonderful because he's a rather singular character for most of the show, but
He just is who he is,
he is who he
unapologetically.
is. He's kind of he reminds me, I forget the guy's name. The two guys from Pirates of the Caribbean. I don't know why I can't remember their names. Um, but he is those characters basically. He is the one who kind of has the old world knowledge about piracy, and a lot of that is mysticism and superstition, and he just knows things because he knows them.
Right.
um, it's not
Or
like
the
he
seagulls told him.
yes, but it's not like Buttons doesn't come off as a character who was ever like, oh yeah, I was taught to sail. He comes off a character who's like, I know to sail because I know how to sail because I know how to sail. Like,
Right.
and so he's wonderful in that respect. But um, let's go back here because I'm getting into characters.
We're going off track.
Yes.
So in killing Nigel, Steed captures two hostages and needs to fence them, and ultimately, we covered the island stuff,
Mhm.
ultimately ends up at the Republic of Pirates,
Yes.
and meets Spanish Jackie and Geraldo, and has like a little thing with them. But Izzy Hands, who is Blackbeard's right hand man, Steed doesn't know this at this point, comes up to him and says, "My boss wants to speak with you." And Steed tells him basically, "Fuck off." He tells him, "Go suck eggs in hell."
Mhm.
Um, which only serves to fascinate Blackbeard even more.
Oh yes. Well.
Because one, we didn't, on the island, he sort of bests Izzy in swordplay in that he tricks him.
Mhm.
So Blackbeard's like, Izzy Hands, like, top swordsman that I know. How is this newbie like out here beating him? And then tells Blackbeard to fuck off. He's like, I need to meet this guy.
Yeah. Uh,
So
Well, I think Blackbeard is even more engrossed by him because he's like, everyone is supposed to be afraid of me. Like, everyone's supposed to piss their pants
yeah,
as soon as they hear my name, and they're telling
right,
my right hand man to go suck eggs in hell. Like,
right. So Steed kind of like paints this target on his back walking through the Republic of Pirates in his fancy white coat and all this stuff, yelling, check out this fabulous booty I'm hawking.
yes.
And so ends up, making some enemies and on a Spanish ship,
Mm,
uh, and finds himself gut stabbed and hanged, kind of at his own fault though,
yeah.
because he kicks his own barrel out from underneath him. Uh, Meanwhile, Blackbeard, who's fascinated by this guy, finds him and his group of leather daddy pirates just swarms in. Are you laughing at me? I'm not wrong.
You're not wrong.
They
They
all
are.
just kind of swarm in and save the crew. And Blackbeard walks over, saunters over, and introduces himself, and Sue just kind of passes out.
Oh yes. Well, I think it is interesting. I mean, they are leather daddies. I mean, the
Oh yeah.
all of Blackbeard's crew is dressed, and I think this was intentional. There's an intentional use of color in this show that I don't think
Hmm.
a lot of people recognize on first viewing. But when we start out with Steed's character, he is dressed rather flamboyantly for most of the show. He's in bright colors.
I have a note about that too.
Yeah.
So when he's at home, he's not. He's in muted colors.
Yes.
But when he's on his own, he's in these bright teal,
Mhm.
like salmon, pink, and lilac pants, like really like vibrant, bold colors.
Mhm.
Whereas at home, he's in like more neutral navies and tans and greens. So
Yes.
that's a huge part of it too. But
Yes.
yeah,
And
Blackbeard's crew all in black leather.
they're all in black leather, and it's almost like they're the bikers of the sea in this show.
Hmm.
Um, they are. I mean, just looking at the way that characters like what's his name, Fang are dressed. I mean, Fang looks like he could have walked out of any modern day biker bar in his
Right.
attire and would fit
Right.
right in. But that's intentional to
But
show
he's the
you that there's a
biggest softy
dichotomy.
in the whole show.
Oh
He's like
yes.
the sweetest guy.
Yes. But again, that is the main that's one of the main themes of the show is this idea that they're performing masculinity, right?
Right. Hmm.
um, and so where
It's so
Fang
crazy.
Fang does initially come off as this big intimidating guy, I mean, he is the size of Wee John. um, he is. We eventually do break through to that softer person underneath. Towards towards kind of the middle end of the show, we kind of get that
Hmm.
reveal. But yes, we do get into the hostage situation and the whole situation with Spanish Jackie. One of the best cameos in this show, by the way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I was kind of putting it off because I have a whole like note about all the cameos, but
Yes.
like incredible. Leslie Jones, love it.
Yes.
So good.
And that's the thing is when we start this, Spanish Jackie's revealed in that episode, and so we are hearing about Spanish Jackie as this fearsome leader of this, Republic of Pirates and so on and so forth. And when it got to be Leslie Jones, that was totally unexpected the first time around.
Hmm. Hmm.
Because Leslie Jones, honest to goodness, she's a funny woman. She does a great job when she's in anything.
And
But
she loves this role.
oh
Like
yes,
from like all the behind the scenes stuff, like with her and interviews and whatever, she loves it.
oh yes.
Loves it. And
Well,
that shows.
I mean, she plays the way she plays Spanish Jackie is like I would expect someone to play a shark in an animated film. It is very much like I'm grinning at you, but my grin is also full of things that could literally gut you.
Hmm.
um, and that's how she talks to Steed, and that's how she talks to everybody in the show. Is very much like, yeah, we're gonna joke around and we're gonna pal around, but know that I could just pull you apart at any time I want.
Yep.
um, and this is where we get some more of Jim's backstory as well, because Jim has kind of a bone to pick with Spanish Jackie. Um, rather Spanish Jackie's henchman, I should say.
Hmm.
Um, so we learn a whole lot more about Jim's character. One, that Jim isn't who, and I'll just put this in quotes here, who he appears to be. Um, so the way, even though the actor is non-binary and gender fluid, they play this thing of Jim is more or less a woman in disguise in this, which is something that runs all throughout pirate lore. Is women dressing as men to find their ways on a pirate cruise, but Jim is skilled. Jim is my second favorite character in the show, by the way. Um,
I think Jim's my first favorite.
yes, but
Obviously, I relate a little bit, but
yes, an extremely deadly and capable person.
not in that way.
Yeah. Are you sure about that? But extremely deadly and capable person, but for a reason. Um, the thing is Spanish Jackie sent some people after Jim's family, did some very bad things to them that we'll talk about later on.
That summary is a little questionable. I don't know
Yeah.
that Spanish Jackie is
Hmm.
associated with that group
Hmm.
necessarily, other than like some of her husbands were part of it.
Yes.
I don't think it was her specifically. Just
Hmm.
Jim killed one of Spanish Jackie's husbands,
Yeah.
of which she has 20. Go go on, girl, like get it. Um, but that's where that animosity comes in, is that Spanish Jackie wants revenge for what
Hmm.
Jim did. There wasn't I don't think her involvement with Jim's family was
Well, yes,
initially part of it.
you're right about that. So it's actually in the reverse from what I'm thinking of it is one of Spanish Jackie's husbands essentially did some horrible shit to Jim's family. Jim, in retaliation, killed this man, and now Jackie, not understanding the full story of what went on, is after Jim's head basically. Um, and we learn out later on that Jim is as deadly as they are because of this event in their lives.
Hmm.
Um, they
They were
were
trained to be an assassin.
yes, they were trained to be an assassin, and I'm sorry. This goes all the way back to shows like fucking Black Lagoon for me, which is the weirdest thing to do. Well, I guess not because they're both stories about pirates actually. But in Black Lagoon, there is a church which essentially is a front for selling guns, um, but also has a legit like assassin nun in their charge, um, and that is I don't know. I have a thing for that in TV and media in general. Jim was basically trained as an assassin nun.
Yeah.
It is this parallel between like God says don't murder, but killing in righteous retribution is fine.
Yeah.
um,
God's divine revenge.
yes. And so moving on for that, I can tell you that honestly, I don't remember a lot of the middle of the show, so I'm kind of gonna let you take over from here.
Got that. I got it. So, actually, before we do that, do you mind if we take a quick break?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
So we'll take a quick break. We will be right back.
A few minutes later.
All right, and we're back. So we were sort of getting into kind of the middle episodes of this. I believe what
Yeah.
we've talked about so far kind of covers episodes 1, 2, and 3 for the most
Yep.
part. Uh, and I am now remembering that episode 4 was probably one of my favorites.
Yeah, that's a very good episode. So, episode 4, um, Steed is kind of laid up in bed after being gut stabbed and hanged. And Blackbeard is fascinated by him still, just like can't take his eyes off of him. Um, and so Steed wakes up, sees this guy just there, like finds out it's Ed, shows Ed around the ship a little bit, shows him his secret auxiliary wardrobe, and they do something weird and they switch outfits. And so you kind of start to see them getting to know each other and
Hmm.
like being fascinated with each other. Um, Ed comes out in Steed's clothes, Steed comes out in Ed's clothes, and the crew's all like, what the hell is going on here? Um, so Ed kind of gets the idea forming in his head, like, I can learn about being an aristocrat. I can kill Blackbeard and retire, um, and just learn everything I can from him. And the plan is that what he tells Izzy is that he's going to use Steed as like the body that no one can recognize or identify, but it's Blackbeard in his clothes on
Hmm.
his ship doing, whatever.
Yes.
So they come across, they're leaving the Spanish vessel that they kind of overtook to get Steed and the crew off
Hmm.
of the ship. Let me just clarify there. Poor choice of words. Shut up, to get them off the ship. And then they come across additional Spanish vessels, and they need to figure out how to avoid it. And something really cool in this is you see at the very beginning of the episode Blackbeard observing the clouds and
Hmm.
saying they look like frankfurters, and that doesn't really come into play until later.
Yeah.
But he's like making all these plans. He tells Lucius to count down from however many hours or
Hmm.
minutes, and they ultimately it all concludes in this. I'm just gonna boil it down real quick. Intense lighthouse scene. Like they figure out that they need to be a lighthouse to avoid the Spanish because the fog that he
Hmm.
predicted by seeing the clouds rolls in, but the tide isn't going to get them away in time because he forgets it's a leap year, which we'll talk about that later. It's
Yeah.
not a thing in 1717. Um, but they come up with this plan and they like work so well together, and it's this like super insane but very successful like fuckery to avoid running into the Spanish ships. And
Hmm.
they do it, and the whole crew is celebrating, and it's like this whole like victorious thing that they pulled off. And it like
Hmm.
shows how truly brilliant Blackbeard really is. But it's Steed kind of realizing that he can be capable, like he can be adequate
Hmm.
at what he's doing and what he chose to do. But it also like it shows those things. It shows Steed kind of becoming more comfortable being a pirate. It shows Izzy's dynamic in
Hmm.
the you need to get rid of this guy, you got to kill him, like really pushing on that button for Blackbeard.
Yeah.
Um, and it shows like the crew kind of coming together to make this shit happen.
Hmm. Well, that's kind of what makes it a really good episode is all of these things culminating together and really getting that idea that Blackbeard is the tactician that he is rumored to be. He
Right.
recognizes details that no one else sees and knows how to exploit, you know, everything around him to his full advantage. I will say fuckery is the technical term here.
Oh yeah.
There is an episode after
The art
this.
of fuckery.
Yes, episode 6 is the art of fuckery.
Yeah.
But fuckery is a technical term here, because for whatever reason, Blackbeard never just learned the word for putting on a play. But
Yeah. No, art of fuckery. It's pretty great.
I,
We need a fuckery.
I think I'm going to refer to industrial light and magic from now on as just the art of fuckery.
Yeah, hell yeah.
But
So in making that agreement,
mhm,
Steed and Ed decide like to work with each other, and Steed is gonna show him, the pageantry of being an aristocrat, fine dining and clothes and stuff like that. And Ed's gonna help him be a better pirate.
yes,
And so they use that, and in the next episode, they kind of show off a little bit of that in practice, and he's helping Steed interrogate this French ship.
mhm,
And in all of that, they find an invitation to a party, a society party for
yeah,
aristocrats, and so they decide to go. Steed doesn't want to, but Blackbeard's like, "Hey, what better opportunity to show this off?"
mhm,
Um, so they go, and they learn about passive aggression,
yes.
which,
So,
like you said earlier, like
mhm,
there's being a pirate and literally slicing someone's throat, and there's
mhm,
using your words to cut through somebody. So
yes.
they really learn about that. But also, this is one of the best parts. Frenchie and Olawande
Mhm.
scamming all the aristocrats during this,
Oh
like,
yes, and
incredible. So good.
it is a literal pyramid scheme in this case.
Yes.
It
Yes.
is Alawande is posing as like African royalty, who has a
And
fortune.
Aziz,
Yeah,
something
something
like
like
that. And his viceroy.
yes.
I just love, what does the viceroy do? Whatever the fuck he wants.
Yeah. But it is, I mean, it's a literal pyramid scheme to the point they are telling people, like, yeah, we have this fortune underneath this pyramid that we have to excavate. And, like, if
Yeah.
you invest on top of other people's investments, you will get a portion of this once we, get it and sell it all.
Yeah. Literal pyramid scheme.
um,
Um, yeah.
yeah. So
So I
they,
mean, that's a really like quick way to like skim through this episode, but like,
mhm,
they learn about passive aggression, we get the pyramid scheme, but also at the end, well, we'll get into
mhm,
more things that happen in this episode, but on the pyramid scheme side of things, um, Frenchie asks Elowande what he did with the money, and he said he reinvested it. So you see Abshir, the person that had helped them
mhm,
during the party, he has the money, and he's going off with some of the other like servants that were there, and he's like, how are we gonna spend this? And he's like, I don't know, I think we make more money, maybe I'll tell them I'm a Nigerian prince and I need help. And I
yeah.
just think that like that callback is, or not callback, but like
Mhm,
anachronism in this is just like beautiful. I love, and we can talk about more of these later, but the anachronisms in this show are incredible. I love it. That's one
oh
of my
yes.
favorite like things in media.
Mhm,
It's great. So Ed and Steed get back to the Revenge and have this moment where Steed is apologizing for how it went, and he says, I'm sorry how they acted towards you. It wasn't right.
mhm,
And Blackbeard has this piece of red silk in his hands, and you see a flashback of him and his mother. And his mother tells him, "We're not meant for these things. Like, this is something from the estate that she worked at,
mhm,
that she took, but they're not those kinds of people." And so Ed, his whole life presumably has been, you know, thinking this, that he's not meant for fine things, and these people just kind of confirm that for him. But
mhm,
Steed takes this piece of red silk and tells him that the old things are the best things, and he tucks it into his left pocket, like right over his heart, and he says,
mhm,
"You wear fine things well." And so it's like Ed realizing that he can have nice things, like literally,
yeah.
but also like he thinks of Steed as a nice thing, and so he's kind of realizing his feelings in that moment. And they have
Mhm,
like they step towards each other, but then kind of just like, oh no, okay, and kind of go off and do their own thing. But that is like a really heartwarming scene, I would say.
oh yes. Well,
And the
I.
music, the music, so I think this is maybe like the second or third instance, but like there's this one song, it's Gnosian or Gnosian number 5, I don't know like how you pronounce that.
Mhm,
But this theme that plays over these moments when Steed and Ed are getting closer.
Mhm.
And it plays here, and it's just so beautiful. It's like night, and the moon is huge, and
Oh yeah.
it's this whole thing.
Well, it's meant to be a very romantic scene in that
Yes.
moment.
Yeah.
Because
And
I,
Steve's just kind of like, I'm a idiot. I don't understand what's going on here. Like,
yeah. Well,
but yeah,
but that even ties into Steve's character, is the fact that he's never really felt that way about anyone before. He doesn't understand what is going on here.
right.
Um, and it plays the Blackbeard's character even more because he is supposed to be a little bit more confident in these situations
Yeah.
after he just went through a moment where he was kind of laid low. Um, because this episode 5 is my favorite episode of the show. For personal reasons, because sticking to reach people is like my favorite fucking thing to do.
Yeah. Oh,
um,
I like forgot to mention, Steve like fully hears that they like fucked with Ed, and he
mhm.
sets the ship on fire.
Oh
Like
yeah.
shuts them all down with their own like passive
Hmm.
aggressive shit. Like tells them basically tells on everybody for what they're
Oh
doing.
yeah.
Like the two main people that they
Hmm.
interact with are actually brother and sister when they're married, and like
Yeah.
this guy had an affair and has a child with that person, and that one's embezzling money from his partner. And so like he just fully goes in on these people because
Hmm.
they talked poorly about Ed.
Yes.
And like, sir, how do you not realize that you have feelings for this man?
Oh yeah. Well, it ties into history a bit because if we know anything about revolutions, I mean the French Revolution is one we all learn about, and these people are the sort of embodiment of those aristocrats who were, put down by the French Revolution. We're talking the pale face makeup, the eyeliner, the big, wigs. They are described in the synopsis of the show as foppish aristocrats.
Yes.
um,
Posh
and
knobs hobnobbing with other posh knobs.
Yes, and that's because that's what they are. They have a very particular way of speaking, not because it's how they speak, but it's because it's how they're expected to speak. They have a particular
Right.
way of dressing because they are expected to dress that way. The passive aggressiveness that is part of this culture is how they are expected to act towards one another. It is this idea of politely one-upping your opponents.
Right.
Um, and to see,
Another moment, I'm sorry.
yeah,
I'm so sorry. Another moment in that episode
hmm,
is like Steed is trying to tell Ed how to like interact with these people, and Ed's like, I stabbed a guy through the skull once or whatever, and Steed is like, maybe not much of the skull talk. And then like immediately, like the person that they stole the invitation from, they're like, oh, you're the famous phrenologist, which is like
yes,
literally touching skulls. And so there's silly shit like that.
No, phrenology was a weird moment in me for this show because of how it was used, especially in American history, but
Yeah.
also knowing that it's total and complete bullshit.
Oh
But
yeah.
it is still part of this show is hilarious and historical. But I remember there's a line in this show: "Skin him and then use the small fork."
The
There,
snail fork.
yes, you can see like the passive aggressive starting to get to Blackbeard during this, and his solution to kind of dealing with this throughout his life has always been violence, um, which is the honestly it's kind of the ultimate equalizer in life. It
Mhm.
is if I can you can talk a big game, but if I can hit you in the mouth, that shuts you up pretty quickly.
Yeah.
um, and that's kind of where Blackbeard is in this moment, where I mean, there are times where I'm watching that episode and I'm kind of just rooting for him to go off and kind of massacre everybody at this party, but he understands that he can't
Steed
do
does it
that.
basically. He
Yes.
does. So he yes, he understands he can't do it, but
Mhm.
Steed takes it upon himself to defend Blackbeard in that moment and
Yes.
use the tools that he knows in
Hmm.
order to do that, but also like kind of sets the whole boat on fire and
Yes.
everybody like has to jump out. So
Well, that's why the title of this show is one of the best as well. It's the best revenge is dressing well. And it is that idea that revenge is a dish best served cold, and that is what Steed does on behalf of Blackbeard here. Is he just turns the tools that have been used against him against kind of the antagonist of this, and like you said, points out all of their little flaws to them. And they are much bigger than anything they could give Blackbeard or Steed shit for.
right.
um, and so it's wonderful in that regard. And if I was going to say, okay, sit down and watch an episode of this show, I would say watch episode 5. But
Yeah, I think it's got a lot of good moments.
yes. But we've got 4 more episodes to cover here.
And this is where
Episodes.
all like the meat of it happens. It's all yeah.
Oh yes, this is where the show gets very juicy in a very short amount of time. This is if everything before this was kind of the potatoes, the rest of this is the steak. And so we go into episode 6, which is the art of fuckery.
Hmm.
And again, just in a nutshell, this is Steed learning from Blackbeard about how to do proper fuckery, as it were.
Hmm.
And so you could go into more detail about that because this one always throws me for a loop.
Yeah. So in this episode at the beginning, Blackbeard tells a story about how the Kraken killed his father. He doesn't feel fear, but that was like one moment in his life that he, felt sort of fear in that moment. But then they are coming across a Dutch merchant vessel. They need to perform a fuckery, or they want to perform a fuckery to kind of like mess with them, rather than just doing a typical raid.
Mhm.
So they work together they kind of pull it off. But I'm just gonna skim through that stuff. Like it's all really cool. You should watch it. But in that, Steed kind of arranges, without Blackbeard's knowledge, Kraken tentacles as kind of like their grand finale.
Mhm.
And so Blackbeard is triggered by this, and he has flashbacks to what actually happened, which is he killed his father,
Mhm.
who was an abusive piece of shit and drunk
Yeah.
and all that awful stuff. Um, and so Blackbeard has this breakdown, and he runs back into the bathroom and lays in the tub, and he tells Steed, "I'm not a good person." He confesses to what he did, and Steed's like, "But you were protecting yourself. Like, I don't understand. You are a good person." And
Mhm.
then so this is kind of also where like the culmination of Izzy's um, pushing Ed's buttons to try and get Ed to actually kill Steed for this plan. He's trying to do it the whole episode.
Mhm.
So he confesses to Steve that as well. I was supposed to kill you, um, but I don't want to do that anymore. And Steve's like, well, can we just pretend that that didn't happen and move on
Mhm.
from it? And like Steve tells him he's a good person, and Ed kind of realizes that like he is more than just his past. He's more
Mhm.
than the things that people tell him he needs to be. And
Yeah.
so being able to have somebody recognize that he can be a good person and tell him that he can be a good person, he wants to do better.
Mhm. And that is probably one of the more heartfelt moments of the show. Um, this is where their relationship kind of shifts from this transactional to sort of this mutual
Yeah.
relationship between one another. They are feeding into each other and helping each other grow as people now,
Yeah.
as
And I think
opposed to
this is
just
co-captains, right? This is when they decide that they're going to be co-captains. Ed is going to
yes.
stay and they're going to work together. And, the two perfect people, like a ship can only have one captain, but,
Mm-hmm.
the two perfect people working together.
Yeah.
Um, So I think that's when that happens. And then
Yes.
episode 7, Talago Jack fucking shows up and
Mm-hmm.
just throws a whole wrench into everything.
Yeah. I have a lot to say about Will Arnett and his portrayal of Calico Jack.
Oh
I
wait, are we
mean,
skipping? No, we skipped
we did skip 7.
St. Augustine.
Yes. So going into episode 7 is St. Augustine.
Okay.
And this is the big episode where we get a lot of Jim's backstory and we get to see their relationship to characters, how they became who they are, what drives them as a character, and also one of the sort of second big romance of the show.
Yeah.
um, and so before all of this happened, there was always sort of this B plot of Alawande kind of following Jim around,
Hmm.
always being at Jim's side, knowing that Jim is perfectly capable of protecting themselves, but always wanting to step up in Jim's defense. That goes like all the way back to episode 4, where everyone finds out that Jim isn't who they say they are, and Jim is lambasted by questions from the crew over and over again until Jim kind of is like, "Hey guys, shut the fuck up! Like I'm here
I'm
and you
not a
have to
fucking
deal with
mermaid.
it."
Yeah.
Yes, I'm not a fucking mermaid, exactly.
If you're not
Um,
going to be Jim, can I be Jim?
yes.
Swede is highly underrated.
He
Swede is
is.
great.
but but we learned a lot about Jim in this show. This is where Jim's, I believe it's their grandmother
Hmm.
is in the, yeah, so it's their
Nana.
grandmother who is the nun, yes,
Nana.
Nana. Who is very old world, like, okay, I, like, did you get enough to eat, honey? No. Did you get enough to eat, honey? Like, they aren't asking you if you're hungry, they're telling you you're gonna sit down at the table and fucking eat. um,
Mhm.
but that's her character, and she plays it wonderfully, but also, like, she is this extremely dangerous woman who had something happen to her family and says, like, we need to, she is scorched earth, not just like, okay, go get revenge on this one person, kill them all. um, and is surprised and disappointed, as many parents are, when they find out that their protege isn't living up to their expectations. You know, Jim killing one man was something that Jim thought was significant, and Nana kind of just says, that's dumb. You killed one dude. There's 19 more out there that I need you to murder. um,
Well, 6 more.
well, 6 more.
It's Siete Gallos. So.
Yes. But this this episode hits a lot of people hard because it is that relationship between a child and a parent or grandparent who holds you to these certain things, expects certain things out of you, and it feels like nothing you can ever do is good enough to fulfill those expectations.
Mhm.
You're constantly just sort of chasing the pot of gold at the end of the
However,
rainbow.
I will say,
Mhm.
that is absolutely, the case here. But also, like, when Jim's like, I go by Jim now, and like Olawande uses they them pronouns for Jim, um, Nana's just like, yeah, okay, Jim. Like, and that's it. Like, they don't need to get into like that family drama side of that thing. And, perfect. I think that's handled very well. Oh, I can't hear you now.
There we go.
There you go. Hmm.
So the great thing about Nana is, yes, she does do that, but it's because to her, like, Jim's identity as a person doesn't even matter to
Yes.
her. She is, that is not even a secondary or tertiary thing about Jim anymore. That is, I forged you to be a, like, I turned you into a weapon, and that's what I need you to be.
Yeah.
um, and so it
I kind of
is,
interpreted their relationship a little bit kinder than I think you did,
yeah,
but I agree. Like, Nana's expectations are Jim is going to go out there and kill all 7 of them for
hmm,
God's divine revenge. Um, but like, it's not so transactional with them.
yeah.
There is definitely love there,
Well, yeah.
but yeah, it is. Yeah,
I could say I probably have a crueler interpretation of that than most people, but that's, I'm not here to trauma dump. But yes, you are right about that. There is still a love and a care there. Nana, of course, doesn't want Jim to die, and part of this reason
right.
why she trained them to be so careful, be so deadly, is because it is their way of protecting Jim in the outside world, knowing that
Right.
there are people who can show up and for no reason take things from you.
Yeah.
And so I need you to be a person who things can't be taken from.
Right.
um, and that plays into Alawande's and Jim's relationship. Both romantic and sexual. This is like the one time we actually see two characters even. We don't see them having sex, but we know that they did in the show. Um,
Not at this point. Not at
well,
this
not at
point.
this point,
So this
no.
is when they, like, Alawande says, I could be your family.
Mm-hmm.
And they almost kiss. But
Yeah.
meanwhile, on the other half of the island, Steed and Ed and Lucius are on this treasure hunt, and
Mm-hmm.
Blackbeard's like, I don't treasure hunt, I'm Blackbeard. I can't do this. And so
Mm-hmm.
he's Steed is kind of pulling off this treasure hunt as a
Mm-hmm.
way to keep Blackbeard invested and wanting to stay on board,
Yeah.
um, and interested.
Mm-hmm.
And so he thinks he's doing this fun activity for them, and Blackbeard hates it.
Mm-hmm.
And, at some point, Lucius just looks at him and goes, that guy really likes you. What the fuck are you doing? Like, why are you being
Yeah.
such an asshole? And so they kind of come around, and,
Mm-hmm.
some of the everything kind of goes wrong.
Mm-hmm.
The treasure map gets burned up, but Blackbeard eventually gets on board, and he's like, this is this is good. Let's
Yeah.
have fun. Let's, continue with this. We can salvage this.
Hmm.
Um, and
Well,
I think this is one of the best examples of bitchy steed,
yeah.
where they don't really find treasure. They find a petrified orange at the bottom of a
Mm.
tree. And Lucius is like, well, I guess the real treasure was the fun we had along the way. And he was like, no, the real treasure is treasure.
Yes. But
uh, and then because it's Jim's family's
hmm
land, Steve gives them the orange and is like,
hmm
I suppose this is yours. And Jim's like, no, I don't even want it. He goes, good, I didn't want to give it to you anyway. Like, Steve is such a bitch, and these are really
he's
great examples of like when he is bitchy.
yes, he is very bitchy, and it's kind of this. I appreciate that moment especially because it is this sort of moment that teaches people this entire show is educational
Hmm.
period, but it teaches people that like if you're in a relationship and you're even not totally into everything your partner's into, right,
Yeah.
like you just have next to no interest into the things that they're into, the things that they gush about, the things that they fixate over, it's still important to at least try to engage in that.
Yeah.
Um, and to realize that the reason that they want to share these things with you is because they fucking like you.
Yeah.
um,
So, to correct myself, this is actually when co-captains happen.
okay,
When
so
they get back from this, they decide to be co-captains. So,
gotcha.
sorry, my 6.5 watch throughs didn't really. Um, I'm gonna let you talk about Calico Jack because I fucking hate that guy. um, I'll be right back, but you
Okay.
you keep talking. I don't like that guy.
So to while we're waiting for Kim to get back, to go on about what happens in episode 8. So a character from Blackbeard's past shows up, Calico Jack, another historical pirate that you can find throughout pirate history and lore, shows up, and he is Blackbeard's kind of old buddy. Um, and he's played by Will Arnett, who, if you know anything about Will Arnett, is not only just a great comedy actor, but is really great at playing assholes. Part of it is just his unique voice, but also just his mannerisms and the way he portrays himself as this cocky, overconfident, full of himself kind of guy who thinks he always knows what's right and is always looking to one up somebody and is always in turn putting somebody down in the process. And whereas someone like Hans plays this excellent antagonist and foil to everything that is going on between Blackbeard and Steed, Calico is the wrench in everyone's plan. um, he is the unexpected. He is less of a single person in this episode and more of a force of nature. Um, but he's like the pirates version of a frat guy.
Yeah.
You
And
know.
like to Ed's leather daddy get up, he is like the cowboy
Hmm.
mullet guy.
Yes, and
But him and Ed have history, and so Ed's like he shows up and Ed's all like excited about it.
hmm
He wants to play along, I guess.
well, yes, but this is also Ed learning through Calico Jack that he has to leave a lot of who he was behind. Um, that who he was before is totally at odds of who he is trying to become now, and Calico Jack is the representation of who he was. Calico Jack
Right.
is the toxic masculinity in Ed's life. He's less violent side of it, where Hans is that, but he is the misogyny. He is he is the heteronormativity. He is all of that. I'm throwing out big words here, but you can Google those later.
I mean, you say heteronormativity, but he definitely cops to fucking Blackbeard in that episode.
Oh yes. He
He's
is.
the I'm definitely straight. It's still straight if you keep your socks on kind of guy.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's not gay unless balls are touching.
Yeah.
Um, but I do love the end, towards the end of this episode where Calico Jack is also literally and symbolically being let go from Ed. He's sent to row away on a dinghy, basically, and it's very much like a just please get the fuck out of here. We never want to see you again. And to the show's credit, you don't fucking see him again.
Yeah.
He's just
Well,
gone.
he gets hit by a cannonball.
Oh
So
yes.
he's probably dead.
Um, Yes,
One can presume he's dead.
there's figurative
Um,
finality, and then there's literal. Hey, I got torn in half by a fucking cannonball. But
but Ed, in talking with Calico Jack,
Mhm.
Jack gets kicked off the ship, and Ed goes with him. He kills Carl the seagull, so poor Buttons is grieving. Um, so in talking with him later, finds out that he didn't just happen upon the ship, that
Mhm.
Izzy actually sent him as a diversion,
Yeah.
in order to distract Ed and get him away from the ship, because Izzy is working with the English Navy to go after Steed. And so
Mhm.
Ed makes that decision at that moment, like, I'm going to break away from my past. I'm going to
Mhm.
help this person that I've grown close to, and he kind of, I think at this point, is realizing his feelings for,
Mhm.
um and goes back to the ship to help get them out of this situation.
Yeah.
Tells them to raise the white flag and not fire back at the Navy, because there's no way that they can beat 3 British warships.
Mhm.
And so this is where the chain starts playing, which is a fantastic musical choice.
Mhm.
And there's this like slow-mo chaos of the British boarding the Revenge and kind of capturing everybody and tying them up. And so they push them down on the deck, and Steed's face down. Ed gets pushed down next to him, and Ed looks over, and Steed's like, "You came back," and he goes, "Never left." And then there's this cute little foot touch moment. Their feet like meet
Yes.
in the middle, and oh, it's just so beautiful. But like they're also, being
Mhm.
taken over by the English.
Oh yes. And I mean this again. I love the sort of the playing around they do with historicity in this, because we're talking about, you know, any pirate history spans from like the 16th all the way up to like the 18th century. And we're talking about like the latter half of piracy in this show. But this is when the British like had kind of a no tolerance policy against piracy, and so like it's not like, oh, we have the East India Trading Company and like they're just trading spices back and forth, and they occasionally run into people who want to steal those things. It's like we recognize piracy as kind of public enemy number one now. And there's, when I say zero tolerance, I mean like execution was the judgment for piracy at the time. And so
Unless unless
unless, yes, unless
you
we
have the Act of Grace, which
yes.
episode 9 handles that.
Oh yes.
Steed is sentenced to death
Mhm.
for killing Nigel, because Chauncey is among the English officers there.
Mhm.
And Ed finds out that Izzy sold him out, and the English are like, "You'll be, handed back over to Izzy, um, in exchange for his service to the crown in selling out Steed."
Mhm.
So they're like kind of letting Blackbeard off the hook, but he decides um, that the Act of Grace is the way to go in order to save Steed, because he's literally facing the firing squad.
Yeah.
And so he, in a moment of desperation, calls out for Act of Grace. And so they're like, "You want to serve the king?" And he's
Mhm.
like, "Yeah, if it'll save this guy." And Chauncey tries to pull he's not a real pirate, so it doesn't count for him. But
Mhm.
then oh, the crew
Mhm.
stands up for him in this moment, and like really, like goes and finds like his journal, and June the 3rd, a real and proper pirate. Like, they stand up for him in that moment, and he's like so proud of them, and like looking at them, and he realizes that, like, yes, this is his family, and they are,
Mhm.
like, no matter what they've been through, they are going to stick up for him. And so, Chauncey goes a little crazy at this, but they both sign the Act of Grace.
Yeah.
They get shipped off to the Naval Academy to train as privateers.
Mhm.
And Steed finds out that he's been reported dead because of leaving his family. So he's
Yes.
kind of coping with that.
Mhm.
And Blackbeard is just like, "Yeah, this is fine. This is my life now. I'm folding socks. I'm great." Like, he shaves his beard off, like, which is
Mhm.
a huge like symbol for this Blackbeard persona, like literally black beard.
Yeah.
But he's just content with this decision that he's made. Um, and Steed is like very put off by that. He's like, "But you're Blackbeard, you're this legend, and why are you doing this for me?" Because he
Mhm.
doesn't realize the extent of his own feelings or recognize those in Ed. And so Ed, having come to this realization, knowing his feelings, finds Steed and sits down with him, and he's like, look, this is the most fun I've had. I'm okay with this. But if you want to like plan an escape, we can plan an escape. And we get the kiss scene,
Mm-hmm.
where he confesses his feelings, like, you make Ed happy, and they kiss each other, and it's the sweet thing. And so they do plan to break out of the privateer academy
Mm-hmm.
and go their own ways and like do their own thing. And so Ed is like, all right, I'm going to go steal a dinghy. I'm going to get a guard to wake you up, and then we'll just head off and we'll go to China.
Yeah.
So that's interrupted by Chauncey.
Mm-hmm.
However, while Ed is off doing his thing, Steed is woken up by Chauncey's gun literally in his face. And so Chauncey pulls him away and is like, yo, you suck. You killed my brother. You defile beautiful things. You ruin everything you touch. And Steed, like, having been told this his whole life, is like, yeah, no, you're right. I do. And so he Chauncey goes after him, starts running at him with his gun, and trips and shoots himself in the eye, like exactly how Nigel did with his sword.
Mm-hmm.
And so Steed is horrified by this. And all the things that he just said are being, tossed around in his brain. And he's in this moment of trauma, is just like, I need to make things right. I am
Mm-hmm.
an awful person. I need to go back to my family and make it right. And so he leaves Ed at the docks. And
Yeah.
Ed is like, uh okay, what the fuck, I thought you wanted me for who I am, but apparently you wanted Blackbeard. And so
Mm-hmm.
he goes back to the ship. We find Steed back in Barbados with his family, and trying to make things right, but that's exactly the opposite of what they want. And so
Yeah.
that's kind of the end of episode 9, if you want to start
Yes.
talking about episode 10.
Yeah. So in
Unless I
episode,
missed something. Did I miss anything?
I don't think you did, honestly. You kind of covered it pretty well. I mean, at the end of the day, again, we're talking about all these episodes, and every one of them on their own, as an insular part of the story, is phenomenal in sort of the messages that it sends people, and just the way that it's done. I will say the whole act of grace thing is like perfectly hammed up for what it is. This is essentially the ancient equivalent of a presidential pardon,
Right.
um, and it is something we
Well, so yeah,
only.
the act of grace is, in exchange for 10 years of service to the king, any pirate will be excused for their
Yeah,
crimes.
exactly.
And in reading like the contract that they have to sign, see it as
Mhm.
like 10 human years. And I just like
Yeah.
that line, which was improvised. We can talk about the other improvised stuff later.
Well, it's hilarious in its own right because it is this again. It plays around with the historicity of piracy, where people know that privateers were a thing, but I don't think a lot of people understand what privateers were. Where in this moment we see, okay, these pirates are basically they have to either face a battle where they will almost certainly die or surrender.
Right.
um, I'll put it this way: the British had many classifications of ships that we still use today. There is no such thing as a man of war in today's modern world. But whereas, like, a modern day destroyer is your scalpel, a man of war was a hammer. And you're talking about a gun with something like 30 plus cannons on it at any given time, all loaded and ready to go. A
Mhm.
broadside from these ships didn't just like sink an enemy ship, it vaporized an enemy ship.
Yeah.
We're talking there have been
And
recorded
there were 3 of
battles.
them.
Yeah.
There were 3 of them.
Well, there have been recorded battles of these ships firing on enemy ships, even smaller pirate vessels, and those ships literally being reduced to splinters in the water. Not a single part of the ship is recognizable anymore.
Mhm.
Um, and so they know that they have to give up in this instance, and that's what leads us into the whole Act of Grace episode and the actual act of an Act of Grace. Where the British at the time were recruiting former pirates to say, well, basically you're mercenaries for us now. And you will go because you know more about piracy than everybody else in our navy. You're going to be the trainers and the teachers and the soldiers who now go and hunt pirates for us.
Right.
But anyway, moving on to the ending here. We're at episode 10, where Steed does go back to his family in Barbados. He is very much trying to force his way into his old life. This is Steed basically kicking down the door.
Yeah.
um, and he re-enters Mary's life at a point where Mary is content with herself. She is learning to be her own person. Um, and she's raising the children on her own just fine, and she's doing well, and Steed is the wrench in her plans. And it takes a very long time for Steed to come to terms with this fact that he does not belong here. He wants so badly for this because he's lost so much before this. He's tried the
It
pirate.
literally takes her trying to kill him.
Yeah, but he's tried the pirate thing before this, and he's at a point where he's desperate for something. He
Yeah.
wants some security in his life to know that he has a place where he belongs. And yes, it does get to the point where Mary is ready to literally just kill him in his sleep.
Right. But they have this beautiful conversation, and
Mhm.
he knows about Doug, Mary's lover, and
Mhm.
asks Mary, like, what does it mean, or how does it feel to be in love? And she explains it, and we get this like really intense like flashback scene of Steed like running back through his history with Blackbeard and realizing
Mhm.
like, oh, I'm in love with him. Like
Yeah.
that's what that is. Like I didn't know. So he realizes like, yes, I don't fit here. Yes, I need to go back and make things right, and
Mhm.
I am, really fucking stupid for doing what I did.
Yes.
But ultimately they plan another fuckery
Mhm.
to actually kill Steed Bonnet, and Steed is mauled by a wildcat, is run over by a carriage, and then has a piano dropped on him. But oh, it's okay. He was sick the whole time. So this is probably for the best anyway. So they pull off this fuckery, and he goes and sets off and does
Mhm.
his own thing to go back to Blackbeard, but
Yeah.
he in doing that renounces all of his wealth, which is
Mhm.
a callback to an earlier scene where he tells his dad that he thought he would marry for love, and his dad said only peasants marry for love. And
Mhm.
so he lets go of his whole fortune, gives it over to his family, like renounces everything. And like, symbolism here is like all of his bright clothes are toned down. He's now in just a plain white shirt
Mhm.
and some black pants, and that's it. Like he's symbolically shedding his old life
Yeah.
and giving up everything to be a peasant so that he can find love
Mhm. Well,
now that he
that's
knows what it is.
and it is symbolic in that way because that is where we learn through this episode that is what that Steed is truly after. He gets to that. The reason why he's doing this is he kind of gets to the point in this show. I mean, Mary is the teacher of this episode. Mary's
Mhm.
the one who kind of unlocks this part of Steve's brain where he, again, like you said, recognizes, hey, I'm in love with somebody. I was taught as a child that only peasants marry for love. So for me to get from point A to point B, I have to become a peasant. um,
Yeah,
and
I mean, I don't think it's so lateral as that, but yeah, that is
yes.
he is doing this symbolic gesture
Hmm.
to be like, I don't need all of this. I can,
Yes.
be
But,
my own person and
mhm.
be who I am and still have love.
Yes, and it's also his
Um,
way of kind of showing love for his children most of all.
yes, yeah.
His children were the one thing in his life that I believe before we even got to this show, if there was like a prequel to this show, that is the one thing in his life he kind of cherished the most. His children were innocent in all of this, never did him any wrong.
Right.
Um, and so he needs to find a way to care for them, and he does that by giving up his fortune. Um, I don't know if his
So
children.
meanwhile,
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Blackbeard is on the revenge,
Mhm.
kind of going through the motions of being essentially broken up with. He
Mhm.
thinks again that he, as Ed isn't worthwhile. Nobody wants him that way. So he grieves that. He has this whole like mourning period of being in a blanket fort and eating all the marmalade with his hands. Um, Kind of being depressed, writing depressing lyrics for songs.
Mhm.
And then Izzy makes something snap in him where he's like, Izzy is reinforcing this. Nobody wants Ed. Nobody wants this namby-pamby pining for his boyfriend in a silk gown.
Mhm.
Um, and so he decides, like, all right, I'm gonna be Blackbeard again. I need to protect myself because if nobody wants that, like, I will be what they want me to be.
Mhm.
And puts on the Blackbeard facade, gets rid of everything from Steed's ship that is Steed,
Mhm.
almost everything.
Yeah.
Um, and just purges everything that reminds him of Steed,
Mhm.
including Lucius. He
Yeah.
pushes Lucius off the ship.
Mhm.
Um, he maroons most of the crew, decides to keep a couple of them. He keeps Jim, who
Mhm.
uh, they had come back to the ship after doing their own little revenge thing for a little while
Yeah.
off screen. Kind of somewhat on screen. They have this
Mhm.
whole moment with Spanish Jackie, which is great. We didn't really touch on that.
No.
But anyway, he keeps Jim, he keeps Frenchie, and
Mhm.
maroons everybody else, and is like goodbye, Bonnet's playthings, or farewell.
Mhm.
And we see him being this like tough Blackbeard persona, and then the very last shot of him is
Mhm.
him breaking down and crying about
Yeah.
everything that he's doing. He's I think more Kraken
Mhm.
Blackbeard in that moment, in
Yeah.
him putting on this persona, and then like he in his own privacy is just like breaking down about it. Still, he
Mhm.
wants to be himself as Ed, and then no one wants that, so like this is what I have to be, I guess. So
Yeah.
that's we leave the last shot of Blackbeard is him crying off the coal
Mhm.
that he smudges around his face because he shaved the beard, so
Yeah.
we needed something.
Well, that is what I meant by saying that this show really does kind of end, at least in season one, in a tragedy. We have a comedy very quickly turn around into this tragedy, where we kind of have a loss of a character. Sort of the parallel to this in more popular media would be this is Ed transferring to Blackbeard in the way that Anakin transitioned into Darth Vader. Him throwing everything off the ship and marooning the crew and doing all these things is Anakin sacking the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. Um, it is,
I
you
mean, one of
know,
them killed children, so
well,
like,
yes. I mean, it's not as bad as what Anakin did, but no, once you get to the point where you draw a lightsaber on children, you've crossed a line that can never be recrossed again. Um, but it is that moment where we see him transition into this, like you said, this Kraken version of Blackbeard. He is darker. He is far more sinister, even without the beard. He is performing Blackbeard in this moment. Um, and the way he does that is to go completely over the top. He is diving much more into what other people view Blackbeard as than what he even was before.
right,
Um, because he needs to do that to protect the one part of Ed that is still inside of him.
right, the softer side of himself.
And that is why he has this moment where he's breaking down. I feel like Taika Waititi was the perfect choice for this because when I'm seeing him do this, this makes me wonder if Taika had went through this in his own life at some point. Um, because it is such a realistic portrayal of what it is to be heartbroken.
Yeah,
Um, it is all five stages of grief wrapped into one. And if you've ever been through a heartbreak of that caliber, you know what that feels like. You
mhm,
are angry and sad and depressed and manic all at the same time, and you have no way of coping with that anymore.
right.
And you kind of go through this period where it's like, let me reinvent myself so other people will start accepting me again.
Right. Well, it's safer to
Mm-hmm.
be this persona and be this angry version of myself than to be soft and vulnerable
Yes.
and true to who he is.
Mm-hmm. And this this plays even more into the historicity of Blackbeard as an actual person himself. Edward Teach, the actual historical Blackbeard, uh, was a pirate who kind of actually spurned violence in his career as a pirate. The reason that he got his reputation as this master tactician is he had a way of outwitting people without really resorting to having to kill anyone. um,
I just want to say, I'm sure you did more research into Edward Teach Blackbeard that Taika
yes,
Waititi actually did in playing this role.
probably.
Like he actually said, I
Mhm.
looked at the Wikipedia page and it was too long, and I went, I'm just gonna do my own thing.
Yes, but I mean, to his credit, that plays really well. Um,
Yes, yes, absolutely.
I,
It's
I
also written really well.
It is written really well, and uh, I mean Blackbeard's career, as far as we know, spanned only 2 years of history to begin with. But in that time, he built a reputation that he is the embodiment of piracy for history going
Right.
forward from that point. Um, he used sort of that figure of him being this sinister, almost eldritch horror on the sea to ensure that he really never had to kill anybody
Right.
until he himself was hunted down and tragically killed.
Right.
Um,
So other real pirates,
yeah.
obviously Blackbeard,
Hmm.
Stede Bonnet, a real pirate, real
Yes.
aristocracy, real, highborn landowner.
Hmm.
Israel Hands, or Izzy, actually Blackbeard's right hand man, his whatever. But like actual Izzy was 16
Hmm.
in real history.
Yes.
Calico Jack, real pirate. Spanish Jackie, based on a real pirate.
Hmm.
In potentially, I don't know how to pronounce it, but Jacote Del Hay
Hmm.
was a real pirate. Jim is based loosely on Mary Read, who dressed as a man to become a pirate. Went
Yes.
by Mark to get onto a pirate ship, and then became like this notorious female pirate. And they also mentioned Hornigold, who was like their boss,
Hmm.
Jack, Izzy, and Ed, but he also was a real pirate. I
Yes.
think everybody else pretty much not actual pirates.
Hmm.
But those are like the historical figures that these are very, very loosely based on.
Extremely loosely based on.
Yes. Yeah.
I think to its credit though, what the show does is they do tie Steed and Blackbeard together because these two people really met in real life at some
Yeah.
point in
And really
history.
sailed with each other in real
Yes,
life.
and
And like
co-captained.
actually like people were like, did they have a relationship? Were they more than just
Oh
like
yes.
pirates operating together?
Mm-hmm. Well, and I mean they even the way that they use Steed's sort of historical figure to build his character in the show is wonderful as well because he was
Mhm.
kind of this highborn aristocrat. He was born in Barbados um, during English colonization of the Caribbean, um, and it's funny to me because I remembered this when watching Act of Grace. Is in real life that was not an option he had. He was killed by hanging. um, and
Yeah. This is
yes,
a device used by the show.
yeah.
It's a plot device. It's not accurate. And like honestly, like the whole show is very like hand wavy about historical accuracy. Like there's probably very little actual history in the show, but it's meant as like
Mhm,
this is the time period more than anything. Like the setting of where they are, and the characters are very much like not based on like
mhm,
aside from like the facts of who they are,
yeah,
not meant
mhm.
to portray who those people really were in history.
Oh yeah, but it's a good thing that they did that because I think watching a show that is pirate history is left to like the History Channel, like play it
Yeah.
on
Oh
there.
yeah. This is
Um,
not that.
don't
If
give
you're looking for
me
that, it's not.
yes, I don't need another pirate documentary. But the way that they use the history in the show is brilliant in a way where you can point at something and say, "Oh yeah, I recognize reading that," but then also see how the show uses that to further its narrative and to build its characters rather than just sticking so tightly to historical accuracy, which
Right.
is, I mean, we're talking about like a time between 1716 and 1718. It's very hard to do. um, Again, this is a time period where most people could not read or write. um, so no, it's great all around, and um, I mean we've again this was the spoiler part of the episode. If you've skipped ahead to this point, and I would recommend just going and sitting down one day and watching the show. It's 10 episodes long. It's about 30 to 40 minutes each episode. It is engrossing. It is funny. It is tragic and sad at points, but it is a brilliant show all around. And I think because of the fact that it's stuck on an HBO streaming service, it has not gotten the credit it deserves.
Right, right. And we could talk about that more.
Oh.
Um, so I want to talk about the anachronisms real quick. Like we touched on some of them.
Mhm.
Steed reads Pinocchio to the crew. That was not out at that time in 1717. It was like in the 1800s, I think.
Mhm.
Oluwande wears Crocs. Like those
Yes.
were his shoes. His pirate shoes are Crocs. Which is like now Crocs are like historically accurate pirate shoes. I just want you to know that. Wear them to the Ren Fair. um, in the in episode 4, Ed says it's a leap year,
Mhm.
but leap years weren't a thing until 1752. Also, 1717 wouldn't have been a leap year, but like
Yeah.
whatever. Um, in Act of Grace, when they're looking for Steed's journal, and Frenchie has it, and they're like, "What is this?" And he goes, "Oh, it's a bit of fan fiction." Which just like, how did they know when writing this show that that would be such a huge thing within this fandom?
Oh yeah.
But yeah, it's a bit of fan fiction. Pyramid schemes, obviously, we talked about that, like
Mhm.
literal pyramid schemes. And then my favorite thing in this show, in the treasure hunt scenes, there is a Crown Royal bag over the head of the shovel.
I did not realize that.
It's just a Crown Royal purple bag over the shovel,
Oh jeez.
which
I feel like
amazing.
this is one of those things that a PA put in the show because they're like someone just happened to have a bottle of Crown Royal lying around and they're like, we need something to
We need
cover a
something.
shovel.
Yeah.
And the PA just under the director's nose just snuck it
hmm
in.
Well, Steed is like, get the fancy shovel from the glass case, and so the fancy shovel has a Crown Royal bag over it. Yeah.
Oh god. But I mean again, this is to the show's credit the way they play around with things like that where if you're an attentive viewer,
Yeah.
you start to notice these kinds of things and it just adds to that sort of hilarity of the show.
It's just silly and fun, and like the actors are silly. Like Reese Darby is
Hmm.
like not a leading man kind of actor, but like plays this role so well.
Oh yes.
He is just like he is Steed.
Oh
Like
yeah. Well,
I don't think I could watch anyone else try and play that role.
oh yes. Well, I remember when I'll say I downloaded the show. um, the
Right,
service I
you were
had,
on HBO Max and
of
you
course.
downloaded them to watch while you weren't on Wi-Fi.
Yes. No,
Correct.
the cover for this show sort of told me something about Reese Darby as an actor right away, and that is his facial expression on the cover. Um, and then after watching the show, seeing the way he emotes so much with just his face alone in close-up shots. I mean, we say that this man isn't like he isn't a lead man, but I feel like he is one of the very few actors in Hollywood who could do an entire movie of close-up shots.
Mhm.
Because
I would say he hasn't had the opportunity to be a leading man,
well, that is
but
true.
is
Um,
absolutely like nails it in this role.
oh yes, through just his facial expressions alone, he tells you so much about the character he's playing,
And
and
Taika does the same.
uh,
Taika truly, like with a glued on beard on his face, like
yeah,
does the same.
oh yes, and if you want to know more about Reese Darby in general, just go to his IMDb page. Don't read a thing. Don't watch his interview. Look at the photo of him that is on his IMDb page and tell me that is like in any way traditional Hollywood.
I need to look
um,
this up.
he is striking the most insane pose, is all I have to say.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, he's a comedic actor. He's from New Zealand. He's been in a lot of like New Zealand I call it or people call it the New Zealand extended universe. Um Flight of the Concords. He was in X-Files in
Hmm.
one episode. He's just a lot of like silly comedic roles.
Yes.
But he pulls this off. It is again, I couldn't imagine anybody else as
Hmm.
Steed.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I mean, he's wonderful in this show all throughout, and I hope that this in a way boosts his career as an actor because he absolutely deserves it. I mean, Taika is already he's MCU. He's on the top of the list at this point.
Star Wars,
Like,
MCU, his own projects. Yeah,
yes.
he's booked and busy.
I mean, if anyone has secured the bag in like a record time, it has been Taika Waititi.
Yeah.
But Reese Darby definitely deserves to be up there with all of them. It's interesting to me that someone like Will Arnett had such a minor role in this show because he was a previous A-lister.
There are so many big names that are cameos or
Mhm.
small roles, and like Leslie Jones,
Mhm.
Fred Armisen is one of her husbands,
Yeah.
Geraldo, Kristen Schaal and Nick Kroll in the French aristocrat boat scenes,
Mhm.
Will Arnett, Tim Heidecker
Yeah.
is Doug, is Mary's lover. Like huge names in
Absolutely.
comedy are just like side roles in this.
Mhm. But
But
I
yeah,
mean, there's even more. I mean, Ewan Breimer again as Buttons,
yeah.
brilliant, brilliant all the way through. I mean, he's a Scotsman down to his core. But you have other side characters in the show. Joel Fry is Frenchie. I
Hmm.
mean, this man deserves to be in so many of his own things.
I mean,
Nathan.
everybody's been in like so many big projects too. Like
Hmm.
Samson Ko, Matt Maher has been in a lot of like American TV.
Hmm.
Nathan Fode has been in a lot of British TV. Matt Maher is Black Pete. Nathan
Hmm.
Fode is Lucius. Yeah, I mean everybody like these are all like not like A-list, but like bigger names in acting. Or
Oh
not,
yeah.
I don't know. I would say
Hmm.
bigger, but like they're you know
Well, there's
pretty well
even.
known.
Oh yes, there's even people like I said. Izzy is probably one of the best villains in media to me,
And
and
Con O'Neill has been in like everything British.
Connor Neal's been literally in everything British. And I remember upon seeing him on screen and then seeing some of the stills of other things he's been on. If John Berthal wasn't the current Punisher, I would want Con O'Neill to be the
Oh my
Punisher.
god.
This man does menace and anger and hatred so well. I think he kind of got shoved into the background in certain parts of the show, but when he's on screen, he commands your attention.
Yeah.
Uh,
I mean, uh Hodor.
yeah.
Christian Nairn is in this. Like Hodor is huge. I mean,
Hmm.
like not physically. Like the,
Yes.
Game of Thrones is a huge property that he was
Hmm.
part of, a big part of. Um who else? Everyone else. Nat Faxon as
Hmm.
Swede. Like he's in so much American TV.
Oh yes. But yeah, I mean, I think we're gushing about all the actors because we love them so much and we love
Yeah,
what they brought to
and
the show.
their roles, everyone does their role perfectly.
Yes,
It all
and
comes together so well.
I'm hoping that the same thing carries on in season two. I have a feeling it will. I mean, with someone like Taika Waititi, he's not necessarily at the helm of this show, but he's very much one of the driving forces of it.
He is an
Mhm.
executive producer and
Mhm.
directed, I think, the first episode. I don't know if he directed any of the other ones. I didn't
Yes,
really pay attention to that.
but I mean, Taika Waititi is I guess the polyglot of Hollywood right now. He does it all.
Also, while we're talking about the actors, so
Mhm.
young Speed is played by Reese's actual son.
Oh, really? Okay,
Yeah.
that is interesting and also very good that they did that.
Yeah. I thought that was a cute little touch.
Yes. No, but we have some more things to cover that you wanted to get into.
Yeah.
Um, the next thing that I had on the list here is sort of you're more into this than I am, but the fandom behind
Before
this
we get into
show.
that, like
Hmm.
while, we're still on the tail of talking about these actors, some of the things
Hmm.
that they have improvised in the show, I just want
Hmm.
to touch on real quick. Like I'll just run through my list.
Hmm.
But beautiful scenes, like hilarious moments in the show, fully improvised. The few that I've been able to find, um, Jim's when they trap Lucius in a crate after Lucius kind of finds out that they're not who they seem.
Hmm.
Um, just like slamming on the crate and going "Cállate, hombrecito," like that moment is like tense and hilarious and fully improvised. When Jim's nose and beard are being peeled off on the Spanish ship and Roach screams,
Hmm.
um, that was improvised. Uh, when the crew has been like invaded after the Spanish scene, when Steed is still recovering and Izzy's yelling at them to, get back to work, and Fang hisses,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and then goes, "Get back to work." That was improvised. Iconic Con O'Neill moment when he's confronting Lucius and he goes, "Ooh, oh, daddy!" Like, improvised. That was, that was not scripted.
No,
Um,
jeez.
the dollop of milk and 7 sugars, it wouldn't be the same with 6,
Mm-hmm.
improvised. The whole restaurant scene, Blackbeard's Bar and Grill and fishing equipment and other delicacies and delights, that improvised. When Calico Jack is like throwing his whip around and Ed's like, "Hey, whip my balls," improvised. The foot touch scene, the foot
Yes.
touch at when they're captured that I
Mm-hmm.
talked about earlier, that was improvised. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's probably the best improvised moment. But Taika's just like, I wanted to show like our closeness in that
Mm-hmm.
situation. And physically we're tied up, but like I needed to be reassuring to Steed in that moment. And yeah, that was fully improvised. So
Mm.
I
The
just needed to rattle those off real quick because like I think that there are so many moments, like those are like such iconic moments,
mm-hmm.
and like they were, the writing on this show is incredible, but like having these
Mm-hmm.
actors being able to throw their own spin on things, it
Yes.
really paid off.
Well, that always brings something special to any piece of media is when you have a cast of actors who can not just improv and do things off the cuff, but do it well, do it subtly, and do it with each other. To understand that there's not just a connection between these people in the show, but a connection between the actors on set. There have been many, many stories from Hollywood of actors on set sort of feeling like a mini family and having a period of grieving after production ends because this family has to break up.
Hmm.
Um, Actors and actresses who have become lifelong friends with one another. Um, because of moments that they shared on set and on screen with one another during moments like that where something is improv and done so well. And also just having directors who see that happen and instead of sort of getting in their own feelings and saying, this is not what, I put in the script, realizing like that is something that's going to do more for the audience
Hmm.
just in general.
Right.
So all these little improv moments, like you said, I mean, they're in there. You listed them all. The foot touch scene I did know about, and they're all wonderful.
Right.
But yeah, let's roll back here, and like I said, you're way more into this than I am. But I know a bit about fandoms from my day as a shameless brony, but but I know about fandoms and I know all the craziness that goes into them, but I feel like this fandom is special to you, and so I want to hear all about that.
Yeah. So I have not participated in fandom before this. Like I was a fan of things. I often said I like the thing but not the fandom of it all. I'm deep in Our Flag Means Death fandom. Um Not an active participant. I make my own things. I buy and support other creators in the fandom, but I don't put my own stuff out there. Um I do pottery, and I've made my own Our Flag Means Death themed mug collection. I have a tattoo about it.
Hmm.
Like I'm deep in the fandom here and have been for over a year at this point. So a few things about that. Um, the hashtag Renew Our Flag Means Death was trending number 3 globally on Twitter, April 3rd. So like a weekish, maybe a
Hmm.
little bit more than a week after the show ended. Um, it was not renewed until June 1st of 2022.
Hmm.
Um, in a, I would say cheap,
In a gateway.
yeah, a cheap pride ploy for HBO.
Hmm.
They renewed it on June 1st, the first day of Pride Month.
Of course.
And since then, we have not, other than like the filming when that was happening, which like wasn't officially announced really, it was just kind of like put out there by, cast or crew at some point.
Hmm.
Um, since then, we have not heard anything about when season 2 will happen. So we know that it was filmed between September and December of last year. We know that it is done principal photography. The cast has done ADR. It is in visual effects currently, as of like some recent stuff that some of the crew and cast have said. However, HBO has not done anything to promote this show. They kind of continue to ignore that it exists. It's buried in listings. It's very difficult to find on the platform. And even though Max Sans HBO was launched today, a lot of people are still having trouble finding the show. They are not promoting it. There's no like advertising for it. It's just not a priority for them. And it was, let's see, one of the top rated comedies on the platform. You know, it outperformed shows like Euphoria, which were huge and very widely pushed. Currently, it has a 4.8 out of 5 audience rating, 93% on Rotten Tomatoes. I found this article, and I'm just gonna like skim a little bit of it, but an analytics group ranked the show as the most in-demand show in the United States after its finale. Taking things into account like streaming numbers, social media activity, fan and critic ratings, and a lot of other data points to come to that conclusion. But again, outperforming, it was in the top 0.2 shows. And it represents an audience demand of approximately 2 billion people globally. And yet HBO is just like, yeah, fuck it. We'll talk about it during Pride Month. And while the show is like wonderfully queer and like really, you know, represents and celebrates those identities, and I think that's a huge part of it, for them to kind of just like brush it under the rug until June is really shitty.
Yeah. I mean, we've touched on this in some podcasts previously, but rainbow capitalism has kind of
Oh yeah.
infected our media space quite a bit.
And so the fandom as a whole has kind of resigned itself to, yeah, we're not going to get any news about it until June. Like, there's not even a date. There's no teaser. There's no other than leaked information, which we'll get into later. There is not anything from HBO as far as like, no, it's coming soon. Like, in all of the advertising that they did when announcing the platform was changing to just Max, there was no mention of our flag being death. And I was all over all of their, you know, I watched the live stream when that happened, when they announced everything, everything that was coming back, everything that was staying on the platform. No mention of it, despite how huge the show is and the fan base for the show is. So, you know, on a much lighter note, Archive of Our Own, you know, the main source for fan fiction, AO3, as of this month, as of like I checked yesterday, there are over 20,000 fanfics for this show.
That's insane.
And 2/3 of those are Steed and Ed. There are, you know, a lot of pairings that came out of this show, a lot of like weird pairings that came out of this show. But that's primarily Steed and Ed, but over 20,000, which it peaked at about 100 new fics per day. But like currently the average over the time span that this show has been out is about 50 per day, which is still huge.
Oh yeah.
50 pieces of new fan fiction per day. Like, that's not including like the chapters that, you know, some people break their stories into. Like, that's just new titles coming out per day. And this is unmatched except by like super fandoms. And those are like Harry Potter, which is massive. I mean, the AO3 Harry Potter stuff is like insane. But like the MCU and Supernatural are other ones that are up there. This is right up there with them, and it's been out for a year. There are hundreds and potentially thousands of like fic threads, and I found out about these things called social media AUs, alternate universes, or SMOUs on Twitter. And the Twitter fan base is just immense. So on top of that 20,000 plus on AO3, Twitter has so much more that is like also like some of it may be cross-posted, but like there is its own like source of fanfic and like fan information on Twitter. And And I think a huge part of that, the Twitter following, is
Mm-hmm.
that the cast and crew interact with people.
Mm-hmm.
They obviously, writers can't go and read fanfic, but
Mm-hmm.
they interact with the art that people put out. They um Samba Shoot, who plays Roach, has
Yeah.
been like our hostage negotiator in like everybody being like, why can't we have more information now? And
Mm-hmm.
he's like, you know, be patient, it'll be fine, like you'll get it eventually, like they're working really hard on it. And so like he's the voice of reason for the Twitter fandom.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, the art that people are putting out, some of the stories that people are putting out, is just incredible. Like novels and novels and novels worth of stories that these people are creating, and something that I think works really well in this fandom, and I think I've seen predominantly, like a lot of people will do like a fix it fic or set in canon era, but
Mm-hmm.
I've seen a lot of, and maybe it's because I seek it out personally, but alternate universes, like modern alternate universes, for
Yeah.
these characters. And you know, for me personally, I had never read a fan fiction
Mm-hmm.
before the show,
Hmm.
and I don't think I've read fan fiction for any other property. But for me, the way that this works is in a little bit about me, real fast. I have aphantasia, so I can't picture things in my head
Mm-hmm.
um, in most situations. Like I can remember things visually, but I cannot create new images in my head. But reading these characters in fan fiction has been a way for me to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's been very personal for me in that. But these alternate universes, people are like coming up with these completely original stories that have these characters and hit some of the same beats, but they're like totally unrelated to like actual canon of the show.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it works really well because I can see these characters in my head.
Mm-hmm.
And that has been something that has helped me be able to read more. Like I think I may have mentioned it, but I've read like about a novel a day on average. Um in fan fiction and Twitter threads and stuff like that. So this has been like a way for me to like really connect to these characters in
Mm-hmm.
different ways. So it's not just the show and canon and people expanding on that canon, but it's also like completely alternate things. So I can read original stories and not, you know, get lost in the comprehension of it because I can't visualize anything. So I can actually visualize it, and it has worked really well for me. And so that's, you know, a little bit personal, but
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of different takes on how to do fan fiction. And yes, a lot of it is porn. A lot of it, most of it is.
That
There's
kind of.
no, there's a lot that isn't, and you know, touches on like I said, the beats of like what happens in the show in a completely authentic way, and just the depths of these relationships, and it's just beautiful. It's so great to
Mm-hmm.
be a part of something like that.
Yeah. No, that's wonderful because that goes back to my days being in the Brony community and exploring all of these new forms of media that I had never explored before. Yes, again, a lot of it is porn. I did like an AMA on Reddit one day where I said like, hey, I am a brony. These things that you love to cringe at, like, ask me anything about this. And people are like, why is there so much porn? And I'm like, it's simple. People just horny people like sexualizing things that they like.
Yeah,
Um,
the fandom is very horny, very horny. Um, for the characters and for each other, frankly, which you know is also very great, I think. So, but there's things that like I said, the cast and crew interacting with it means so much. Like
hmm
they'll like retweet fan art.
hmm
And like Taika has even said like it's cool to go on and like see porn about these characters, like about himself. Um, something that you know you don't really get in
hmm
fandom. You don't really get the actors acknowledging or the cast and crew acknowledging its existence really. There's one, like I said, the social media alternate universe threads on Twitter,
hmm
which is like they're like their own like really intense, deep, like really fleshed out stories. There's this one really popular one, and somebody tweeted it at the showrunner David Jenkins, and was like, hey, have you read this? And he said, I will after the show's done, because writers can't read fanfic because it could influence how they write.
Yeah.
But like David Jenkins saying, yeah, I'm going to read this after I'm done writing the show is like huge and insane. Like you don't see that
Yeah.
very much.
Well.
But there's also like really silly things that have happened in my experience on fandom Twitter. Um, something that happened pretty recently was people didn't realize that there was a wall behind Ed and Steed when they kiss on the beach. But there's like fully a stone wall behind them. And so like it was just a moment where they're like, hey, has this always been there? And people like questioning their reality. During Halloween, there was a meme that somebody put out, you know, the Spirit Halloween bag memes. Somebody made one that had Steed on it, and it said gay loser. And so Reese Darby's wife saw it, and she was like, oh, I'm going to, you know, tell Reese's lawyer about this because this shouldn't be a thing. And they're like, no, it's just a meme. Like, it's not really in Spirit Halloween.
Yeah.
But she like kind of went off on
What are
the
you?
fandom about it.
What are you gonna do in that moment? Go after Spirit Halloween? Like they don't give a fuck.
Right, right.
Like,
But it was just this moment of like, are you like, how are you like, what is going on here? How do you think this is real? Um, and I mean, there's a lot of like discourse and a lot of you know, people calling out whitewashing in fan art. A lot of people either using gray tones or whitewashing Ed's skin. Other like Olawande and Jim as well, Roach,
yeah.
Frenchie, that kind of thing. Just calling that out, and then people trying to defend themselves and just being like, no, just like do better. You know, acknowledge that you messed up and do better.
Yeah.
But I think that as a whole, it's building this better foundation for these people to actually like treat these characters with respect and not like be, I don't know. It's I think it ultimately fosters a better environment, but it has caused a lot of discourse and
Oh yeah.
you know, ostracization of people. So but yeah, and then the last thing I want to touch on is the clowning. So we as a fandom have multiple times been like, all right, this is the day. There's got to be something today. Like these are all the clues that we've had. This is everything leading up to why I think it's going to be today that we get some news about season 2, and it never has happened. It's never been real. Like some of the cast will post like behind the scenes photos or like something that like in somewhat could potentially be relating to it. But it has been over a year or almost a year since we got announcement that there would be a season 2, and we've not had anything. So as of
Gosh.
June 1st, it will have been a year. So
Hmm.
in a week.
That's crazy.
But yeah.
Yes. No, that is pretty insane. And I say that because again, I'm going back to the one thing that I was kind of the biggest fan of during its run, and that was My Little Pony: Friendship is Magic, and remembering sort of the kind of waiting with bated breath between seasons and
Yeah.
thinking like, oh well, Hasbro is dropping this thing over here, and that means that it's coming back, or you know, we got a tweet from one of the voice actors over here, and that means it's coming back, and so on and so forth. The probably one of the funniest things to come out of there is John Delancey, who famously played Q in Star Trek. Um, he showed up for a role as one of the most beloved, my favorite character from the show, a guy called Discord. He showed up one day to the studio and just thought like, oh, this is a regular voice acting gig. I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna be out of there. I'm gonna be done. And the day his episode aired, his Twitter fucking like exploded. It went nuclear viral, and he's like, who are all these people? Like, I don't know. And then he's just showing up at events. He's showing up at BronyCon and stuff like that, and became an integral part of this fandom.
Mm-hmm.
But it's great that you have found something like that to be passionate about, and I think that that is something that everyone needs from a piece of media they enjoy. They need a community behind them, and it's even better in this case because the people on the show are interacting with the fandom, right? It's not just another thing in the background to them, it is something that they recognize is valuable. And I mean, the writers don't strike now; they can read all the fucking fan fiction they want.
Well, if they plan to write a season 3, they really shouldn't.
Yes. No, the one of the strange things about fan fiction and writing for TV and movies is that there have been writers who, of course, have gone sort of off the books and read some of that and then used a lot of it in their content, which hits kind of a legal gray area, but usually the people who are creators of that fan fiction generally appreciate something like that if it isn't just
Yeah,
wholesale plagiarism.
yeah.
Um,
I think it's more plausible deniability, so that
yeah.
like somebody can't like have a vendetta against them for using like a beat from a story that they
hmm
had.
Yes, but it's also great that there's discourse within that community as well. It isn't just completely gushing about the show and making fan art and stuff like that. It is a
Yeah.
recognition that this fandoms can lead to more serious discussions of real issues.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah, and beyond just like the skin tone thing in art, like there's a lot of people that will put like pretty damaging stereotypes on some of these characters in their fictions,
hmm
fanfics. And like people will call them out about it. And
Yeah.
I think in most cases people are like, yeah, I acknowledge I fucked up. I will do
hmm
better in the future, or they'll change
hmm
something about the story. So, I think it really just does, like I said, foster this environment where you can do better.
Yeah. Well, it's that. It is sort of that thing. I have a lot of friends who are artists, and it's that thing about putting your art out there and opening it. When you do that, you inevitably open it up to critique.
Yeah.
Um, some of that critique, of course, can be constructive and well received, and some of it can just be downright trolling at the end of the day. Um, I think it's important for people who, fan fiction seems like it's become sort of the one of the biggest parts of this fandom. The content stream, just the figures you gave me, that content stream is fucking ridiculous, honestly.
Yeah.
Um, that is an insane output.
Hmm.
um, and to see that come as a good thing, but with it comes that recognition that you are in a sea of this stuff, and there's always going to be bad stuff in there.
Right.
Um, and it is good that the fandom is at least taking the time to kind of weed some of that out in a constructive way, most of all,
Yes.
because it is that sort of, you know, you may DM like a writer on Twitter and say, hey, I read your fanfic, all this stuff was really good, but you kind of like you reduced a character to like one thing in your story, and that is not how I think the rest of the fandom sees that character. Um, and it's good for a writer to acknowledge that and to use it to better their craft overall.
Exactly.
Um, I mean, we do the same thing in the mini painting community. I'm part of many mini painting groups, and people post their stuff out there. And yes, there are good and bad mini painters, but when we critique the bad mini painters, it's like, hey, like watch this video that I watched to show you how to do that better.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, they're
and
trying to help people do better. And yes, some people are going to take offense and
mhm,
get really defensive on it. And, but we're weeding out the bad people.
yeah, and that's actually important for a fandom because I will tell you that that is one of the things that contributed to the death of Bronies as a fandom. Is we could not effectively weed out the toxic elements of our community quick enough. Um, I mean, to be honest, just the nature of that fandom alone, when it was introduced, lent itself to some pretty poor elements. And back then, I mean, education around neurodiversity and things like that wasn't as big as it is now. And so it is. I think the one thing that I can push going forward for all fandoms, if you are a member of a fandom, whether it be this one or anything else, find those bad elements of the community. I'm not saying like sit down and doom scroll through Twitter all day looking for them, but recognize that those elements exist. Do your best to approach them in a constructive fashion, and if there is no way to sort of build that person up, then do your best to help push them out. Put them in an area where they can do their own thing. They still have a right to enjoy that content, but they don't get to enjoy it with the rest of the community anymore.
Mhm.
That is super important. Well, I think our last thing here, if you have nothing else to go on about the fandom, you've said so much so far,
Yeah.
um, is you had some spoilers for season 2 actually to bring up. So we're back
Right.
in
So
spoiler
season
territory.
2 news. We'll talk about non-spoilery stuff first. So,
Mhm,
like I said, it was announced June 1st of 2022. It is now almost June 1st of 2023. We've got no news
mhm,
as far as a release date or a trailer or a teaser or anything official. Um, It was filmed in New Zealand. The
Mhm.
first season was filmed in LA. It was filmed between September and December of 2022. In April, voice actors were doing ADR, April 2023. And then in May of 2023, they was still in VFX as far
Mhm.
as some of the crew and cast had said. So spoilery stuff. So the things we know so far are there are 8 episodes. There were 10 in season 1, there are 8 in season 2. And this first was presumed because on or David Jenkins, the showrunner, posted the board for their last day of filming, and it was episode 208.
Mhm.
And then I think it was confirmed by some of the crew later on.
Okay.
There's a new logo for season 2, and this was first leaked by David Fain, who plays Fang. I think he posted a script and it had it on it, and it is a. It still says "Our flag means death," and it has a Roman numeral 2, but the flag on it
Mhm.
is a. It's 2 skeletal mermaids. One of
Mhm.
them has the spear, and one of them has the bleeding heart from Blackbeard's flag, and
Mhm.
then their hands meet in the middle, and it spells out Ed,
I
which
see.
is just. Isn't that so cute?
I'm seeing that now.
Um,
It is very cute.
so we talked about Lucius in season 1 and how Ed pushes him off the boat and he's presumed dead.
Mhm.
Um, do you want to hear spoilers on this, Nate?
I mean, it's
There was a lot
already.
of like Lucius is going to be back in season
Mhm.
2. Like there was a lot of speculation about that.
Mhm.
He was spotted in cast photos. One
Okay.
of the directors, Fernando Frias, posted cast photos from one of his episodes that he was directing, and Nathan Fode was in those photos. He was
Mhm.
also seen at the wrap party. There's also going back to the fandom stuff for a second. One of the um, bigger names in the fandom posted pictures with the cast, and later on had said Nathan Fode took the pictures and said, "You can tell them that no one's gonna believe you," in like a very Bill Murray moment. Um, there are lesbian pirates in season 2.
Okay.
So Madeline, Sammy, and Ruibo Chen, I believe is how you pronounce her name,
Mhm.
both cast as female pirates. And David Jenkins had said that there will be lesbian pirates. So, yay.
Okay.
Um, there have been behind the scenes photos leaked of like some of the costuming stuff that they've had. And in those pictures, there were pictures on the wall of like Chinese pirate costumes.
Mhm.
So I don't know how big that'll play into it, but that was a thing. There's pictures of Blackbeard and Pearls. There's been synopsis leaks of just like general overarching season 2. I've not read them. I don't want to read them. Um, Leslie Jones had said on when the episodes were put out in the UK on BBC, Christian Nairn hosted like Instagram watch-alongs, and so he
Mhm.
would have some of the cast be on the show with him, and Leslie Jones was on one of them, and in that she said that Spanish Jackie fights with Blackbeard. I think it was
Mhm.
in that. It may have been in a different interview, but she
Mhm.
she said a lot of stuff during that. But one of the biggest things is that Spanish Jackie fights with Blackbeard.
Oh
So
wow.
that's something to look forward to.
Yeah.
At one of the convention panels, Samba Shoot, who plays Roach, said, I think he was relaying something that one of the writers actually said, but he said season 1 is about Steed becoming a real boy, and season 2 is about Steed becoming a man.
Okay. Hmm.
So that's just something to think on.
Yeah.
There is a wedding at some point. There's
Hmm.
pictures of a wedding, and there are characters dancing together.
Mhm.
These are like very like cryptic, very low res images, but people have like taken a lot of information from them. There's a
Mm.
fire
Okay.
that happens. Presumably, the revenge will burn.
Mhm.
Um, let's see. There's a cave. A big scene presumably happens at this cave. Some of the main characters have or their body doubles have been spotted there, and Hornigold is casting for Hornigold.
Oh boy.
Yep. But that's pretty much all I have for that.
I mean, even just from that, I think we're gearing up to see a pretty interesting season of the show. They have the hurdle that is this great season one to overcome. Um, Kim will be back in a moment, but yeah, they've got this massive sort of hurdle to jump over because season one, again, if you haven't watched this show and you've made it to the end of this so far, or at least up to this point, is is phenomenal. It's probably one of the best pieces of media I've watched in a long time, and I cannot recommend it enough. From everything that Kim just gave us, though, it looks like they're putting a lot of work and heart and soul into season two, and I really just can't wait to see what they come up with. If it's a story about Steed going through another major transition in his life, I'm a little worried what that leads into, but I'm also excited at the same time. Again, the show is just I cannot say it enough. The show just for one season basically blew my socks off.
Yeah,
And
wholeheartedly agree. Also, yeah, why have you watched all of this if you've not watched the show?
yes, if you made it to this point, you haven't watched the show, then you should have stopped somewhere along the way and gone and watched it. We've been in this for 2.5 hours at this point. We're hitting podcast length now, but yeah, I mean, again, I don't know what else to say about it other than it needs to be watched. It needs more recognition out there. 2 billion, streams globally is great and all, but if HBO or Max as it is now is pushing this show to the background, it kind of needs all the support from viewers it can get at this time.
Totally.
So like tell your friends,
There's
tell your
so much more
family.
story to tell with it too.
Yes,
And it's
tell
so queer and it's so beautiful. Like yeah, it's just incredible.
Yes, but tell your friends, tell your family, tell strangers on the street to go watch Our Flag Means Death. Shove this in somebody's face who you think is going to be interested in it, and get them to sit down and watch it with you one day.
Hmm.
Um, I guarantee you it is worth it. And even if they walk away not liking the show, from what I've seen from people who have watched it and not like it, they're still going to take something away from it. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think that's all I can say about it. Is there anything else you have left to say about this?
No, I think you touched on pretty much everything that I had to say. It's so worth it. It's 5 hours of media.
hmm
If you can find the time to watch it, it is so rewarding and it tells such an incredible story. The beats, the pacing, everything is just done well. The acting is incredible, but just the overall like themes of this are just so heartwarming and authentic and just incredible. So
Yeah,
it's so worth it.
gotcha. Well, before we finally wrap up here, I will tell the audience what's going on for the rest of the week for us for now. So I kind of did a surprise stream on Monday. I had meant to play two completely different things from what I ended up playing. But Chris tomorrow will be cover. Is it tomorrow or Thursday? Thursday. He will be covering the PlayStation Showcase event, and he'll be playing some Tears of the Kingdom. Friday, I will be back with hopefully Death Stranding if it runs on my PC. um, but yeah, that's pretty much all you got going on for the week. I do want to thank you, Kim, for joining me for tonight's stream. It was much appreciated. I haven't done one of these Taco Tuesdays in a long time.
For
um,
sure. Like I said, next time I have a hyperfixation like this, we'll do it again.
absolutely. Well, before we go here, is there anything about yourself you want to plug? Any of your socials you want to share with the audience? Anything of that nature?
I am B Clay Do Crime on Instagram. If you want to follow my pottery stuff, I'm at Kimflers on Instagram as well for my personal stuff, but I'm private everywhere else.
Okay. Well, there you go. Definitely follow their pottery stuff. I believe you were not only learning, are you teaching pottery as well right now?
I am.
Yes. Okay, so you're teaching pottery as well. That's amazing. I took one pottery class in high school, and that was the end of my story with it. But yeah, so again, to our viewers, thank you all for watching. If you like what we do, you can follow us collectively everywhere on Spacetime Taco. You can follow me currently only on Instagram at a little teapot 89. And if you like what we do, consider following us here on Twitch. Doesn't cost you anything to do so. We appreciate everyone who does. If you really like what we do, subscribe to us here on Twitch. We need the money.
We
And
really do.
if you really like what we do, go hop on our Patreon. We're updating the rewards there. We have a Throne account as well where we're updating some things if you just want to donate materiel for the podcast and the rest of the show. But yeah, that's all we got to say. Go watch Our Flag Means Death and have a good night.
Okay, love you. Bye bye.